They laughed when she chose kindness over survival. They called her weak when she defied an alpha's rejection. But when Elara Frostvale dragged a dying wolf through her cabin door during the worst blizzard in a century, she had no idea she was saving the most dangerous man in the frozen north, or that her act of mercy would shatter every rule the wolf packs lived by. This is her story. Stay until the end to see how the Omega they abandoned became the one thing their brutal world feared most. Irreplaceable. Drop a like and comment what city you're watching from. Let's begin. The wind screamed across the northern ridge like a wounded animal, hurling snow sideways through the skeletal pines. Elara Frostvale pressed her mittened hands against the frost-filmed window of her cabin, watching the world vanish into white chaos. 8 months. 8 months since she'd walked away from everything she'd ever known, and the wilderness still surprised her with new ways to kill. She turned from the window, her breath misting in the frigid air despite the fire crackling in the stone hearth. The cabin was barely more than 4 log walls and a pitched roof, salvaged from an abandoned trapper's claim she'd found half buried in brambles. No running water, no electricity. Just her, the mountains, and the kind of silence that made you hear your own heartbeat too loud in your ears. This was exactly what she'd wanted, wasn't it? Elara grabbed another split log from the dwindling pile beside the door and fed it to the flames. The bark caught with a hiss and pop, sending sparks spiraling up the crude chimney. Outside, the blizzard intensified, battering the cabin walls with fists of ice and wind. She'd weathered storms before. November had brought 3 in quick succession, but this one felt different, meaner. The kind of cold that didn't just chill your bones, it erased you. She wrapped her wool shawl tighter around her shoulders and settled into the rickety chair she'd repaired with leather cord and stubbornness. Her hands found the half-finished scarf in her lap, needles clicking in familiar rhythm. Knitting kept her fingers nimble, kept her mind from wandering down paths that led nowhere good. But tonight, the memories came anyway. "You're too soft for this pack, Elara." Marcus Ironridge's voice echoed in her skull, sharp and dismissive as the day he'd said it. The rejection had been public, delivered in front of the entire Ironridge pack during the Harvest Moon gathering. She could still see the faces, some pitying, most indifferent, a few openly amused. Marcus had stood on the speaker's stone, his alpha authority radiating from every pore, and declared that Elara Frostvale lacked the strength, the fire, the edge required to stand beside a leader. An Omega who feeds stray pups and mends the clothes of wolves too lazy to do it themselves, he'd said, his lip curling. That's charity work, not partnership. I need someone who understands that survival isn't about kindness. It's about power. The pack had murmured agreement. Of course they had. Marcus was ascending, his star rising fast among the northern territories. Aligning with him meant status, security, a share of his growing influence. Elara, with her quiet ways and her habit of choosing compassion over dominance, represented everything the modern packs were trying to shed. Weakness, sentiment, the old ways that got you killed. She'd stood there, frozen, as Marcus turned his back and walked away. No one had defended her, not her childhood friends, not the elders who used to praise her gentle hands when she helped with the sick and injured, not even her own family. They'd just let it happen. So she'd left. That very night, with nothing but a canvas pack and her grandmother's wool cloak, Elara had walked into the wilderness and never looked back. The needles paused in her hands. She stared into the fire, watching the flames devour the wood with mindless hunger. "Too soft," she whispered to the empty cabin. Maybe he was right. A gust of wind slammed against the north wall hard enough to rattle the shutters. Elara jumped, her heart hammering. The blizzard was getting worse. She set the knitting aside and moved to the small pantry shelf, taking mental inventory. Smoked venison from the deer she'd taken down 3 weeks ago. 2 jars of foraged berries preserved in honey. A sack of wild rice she'd traded pelts for at the distant trapper's post. Enough to last through the storm, and then some. She was fine. She was always fine. Alone was better. Alone meant no one could measure her worth and find it lacking. Alone meant her kindness couldn't be weaponized against her. The scratching started just after midnight. At first, Elara thought it was a branch caught against the cabin. The wind was strong enough to hurl debris, and the pines grew close on the eastern side. She rolled over in her narrow cot, pulling the patched quilt over her head, and tried to ignore it. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Persistent, rhythmic, wrong. She sat up, pulse quickening. Firelight threw dancing shadows across the log walls, turning familiar shapes sinister. The scratching came again, weaker this time, accompanied by a sound that made her blood freeze. A whine. Low, desperate animal. Elara swung her legs out of bed, her bare feet hitting the icy floor. She grabbed the hunting knife from the table, 8 inches of folded steel, sharp enough to gut a rabbit, and crept toward the door. Every instinct screamed at her to stay inside, to let the storm claim whatever was out there. But that whine, so full of pain it carved something hollow in her chest. Too soft, Marcus's voice sneered in her memory. "Shut up," Elara hissed at the ghost. She pressed her ear to the door. The scratching had stopped, but she could hear breathing now. Labored, rattling, each exhale a fight. Whatever was out there was dying. Her hand hovered over the bolt. This was insane. Opening the door in a whiteout blizzard could kill her just as surely as whatever lurked outside. And if it was a predator, a starving mountain cat or a territorial bear, inviting it in was suicide. But if it was dying, Elara's fingers closed around the bolt. "I'm going to regret this." She yanked the door open. The wind exploded inward, a roaring wall of ice and snow that blinded her instantly. Elara threw up an arm, squinting against the onslaught, and nearly missed the massive shape collapsed on her doorstep. A wolf. Not a dog, not a coyote. A wolf. Easily 200 pounds of gray and silver fur matted with ice. It lay on its side, flanks heaving, one front leg twisted at an unnatural angle. Blood darkened the snow beneath it, freezing almost as fast as it spilled. Elara's breath caught. Wolves didn't come this close to human dwellings, not unless they were rabid or desperate beyond reason. And this one was huge, far larger than any she'd seen in her months of solitude, the kind of size that spoke of strength, dominance, alpha blood. The wolf's eye cracked open, a sliver of molten silver that fixed on her with startling awareness. "Run," her hindbrain screamed. "It's an alpha. It could kill you even half dead." But those eyes. Beneath the pain and exhaustion, she saw something that stopped her cold. Recognition. Not of her specifically, but of the choice she was making. The wolf knew she was deciding whether to save it or leave it to die. "Damn it!" Elara dropped to her knees in the snow, knife clattering forgotten beside her. She hooked her arms under the wolf's shoulders, her fingers sinking into blood-slicked fur. "Damn it! Damn it! Damn it!" She pulled. The wolf was dead weight, a mountain of muscle and bone that barely budged. Elara planted her feet and dragged, her boots slipping in the snow, her shoulders screaming. Ice pelted her face, each flake a tiny needle. The wind tried to rip her grip away. "Come on!" Inch by agonizing inch, she hauled the wolf over the threshold. Its injured leg caught on the doorframe, and the wolf let out a yelp that sounded almost human. Elara's heart clenched, but she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. If she paused now, they'd both freeze. Finally, the wolf's tail cleared the door. Elara slammed it shut, threw the bolt, and collapsed against the wood, gasping. Her hands were numb, her arms trembling with spent adrenaline. Snow melted in her hair, dripping cold trails down her neck. She'd just dragged a full-grown alpha wolf into her tiny cabin. "What is wrong with me?" she panted. The wolf lay motionless on the floor, its breathing shallow and uneven. Up close, the extent of its injuries became horrifyingly clear. The broken leg was the least of it. Deep lacerations crisscrossed its ribs, the work of claws or teeth. Its left ear was torn nearly in half. Patches of fur were missing, revealing frostbitten skin beneath. This wolf had been fighting and fleeing. Elara pushed herself upright, her mind shifting into the calm focus she remembered from helping her grandmother treat injured pack members. Panic wouldn't save this animal. Action would. She grabbed every blanket and pelt she owned, piling them near the hearth. Then, gritting her teeth, she hooked her arms around the wolf again and dragged it onto the makeshift bed. The wolf's eyes stayed closed now, its massive head lolling. She pressed her fingers to its neck, feeling for a pulse. There. Faint, but present. "Okay," Elara murmured, more to herself than the unconscious wolf. "Okay, stay with me." She stoked the fire until it roared, filling the cabin with blessed heat. Then she fetched her water basin. ice cold from sitting near the door, and began the painstaking work of cleaning the wounds. Her grandmother's voice guided her hands. "Wounds must breathe, child. Infection is a slower death than blood loss, but just as sure." The wolf didn't stir as she worked, even when she had to probe a particularly deep gash to remove a fragment of what looked like bone. Not the wolf's bone, something else's. Whatever this creature had fought, it had won, barely. Hours blurred together, clean, stitch, bandage, repeat. Elara's fingers cramped, her back ached, her eyes burned with exhaustion. But she didn't stop. The wolf's breathing steadied incrementally, the rattling wheeze softening to something almost normal. By the time gray dawn light crept through the shutters, Elara had done everything she could. The wolf lay swaddled in furs, its broken legs splinted with firewood and leather strips, its wounds packed with moss and sealed with pine resin. It looked less like a fearsome predator and more like a broken, fragile thing. She slumped beside it, her back against the stone hearth, and finally let herself feel the weight of what she'd done. "You'd better live," she whispered, exhaustion dragging at her words. "Because if you die, I just wasted my entire supply of bandages on nothing." The wolf's ear twitched, barely perceptible, but Elara saw it. Against all logic, she smiled. The storm raged for 3 days. 3 days trapped in a cabin barely big enough for one, with a wounded wolf the size of a small pony sprawled across the only warm spot in the room. Elara slept in her cot, waking every few hours to check the wolf's breathing, to dribble water between its jaws, to change bandages that seeped red despite her best efforts. On the second day, the wolf's eyes opened. Those eerie silver eyes tracked her as she moved around the cabin, stoking the fire, preparing a thin broth from boiled venison bones. Elara tried to ignore the prickle of unease that came from being watched by a predator. "I'm not going to hurt you," she said, ladling broth into a wooden bowl. "So you can stop looking at me like I'm dinner." The wolf blinked. Slowly. Almost deliberately. Elara carried the bowl over and knelt beside the makeshift bed. "You need to drink, even if you can't eat yet." She tipped the bowl to the wolf's muzzle. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the wolf's tongue lapped weakly at the broth, swallowing in careful increments. Relief flooded through Elara. "Good," she murmured. "That's good." She stayed there, patiently holding the bowl, until the wolf had drunk every drop. When she pulled away, the wolf's eyes followed her. "What were you running from?" Elara asked softly. She settled cross-legged on the floor, her back to the fire. The wolf couldn't answer, of course, but talking filled the silence that otherwise pressed too close. "Must have been bad. You're strong, I can tell. Built like a fighter, but something beat you down hard enough that you ended up here." The wolf's gaze didn't waver. "I ran too," Elara admitted. The words spilled out before she could stop them, loosened by exhaustion and isolation. "From my pack. From a man who told me I wasn't good enough. Everyone agreed with him, you know. They all thought I was weak because I cared about things other than power. Because I fed the pups and helped the elderly and actually gave a damn when someone was hurting." She laughed, bitter. "Maybe they were right. Maybe kindness is weakness. I mean, look at me. Living in a shack in the middle of nowhere, talking to a wolf who probably doesn't understand a word I'm saying." The wolf huffed, an actual, audible huff that sounded remarkably like disagreement. Elara blinked. "Did you just—" Another huff. The wolf shifted slightly, wincing, but managed to rest its chin on its paws in a posture that looked almost attentive. "Okay then." Elara shook her head, a smile tugging at her lips despite herself. "Guess you're a good listener. Better than most wolves I know." Over the next day and a half, Elara fell into a rhythm. She tended the wolf's wounds, kept the fire fed, rationed their dwindling supplies. And she talked. About her childhood in the Iron Ridge Pack, about her grandmother who'd taught her to heal, about the small joys she'd found in her months alone, the first snowfall, the deer that came to drink at the stream, the northern lights that painted the sky in shades of impossible green. She talked about the rejection, too, how it had felt like being erased, like every kind thing she'd ever done was being retroactively judged as foolishness. How she'd wondered, in the darkest moments, if Marcus had been right, if the world really was too brutal for softness to survive. The wolf listened to it all, never interrupting, never judging, just present. On the third morning, Elara woke to silence. The howling wind had stopped. She sat up, disoriented, and realized the blizzard had finally passed. Watery sunlight streamed through the cracks in the shutters, painting golden lines across the floor. She looked toward the hearth. The wolf was gone. Elara's heart lurched. She scrambled out of bed, searching the small cabin as if the massive animal could somehow be hiding. But the door was still bolted from the inside, the shutters latched. There was no way out unless... Her eyes fell on the chimney, soot marks on the stone, larger than they should be. And near the base of the hearth, a single tuft of silver fur. "You climbed," Elara breathed, half disbelief, half awe. She unbolted the door and stepped outside. The world had transformed overnight. The storm's violence was gone, replaced by a crystalline stillness. Snow blanketed everything in soft, undulating drifts that sparkled in the morning light. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe, but the sky was a flawless expanse of blue. And in the snow, leading away from her cabin into the forest, were massive paw prints. Elara followed them with her eyes until they disappeared into the pines. The wolf was strong enough to walk, to run, to survive. She should feel relieved. Instead, standing alone in the vast white silence, she felt the weight of solitude return like a physical thing, heavier than before. "You're welcome," she whispered to the empty forest. The trees held their silence. Elara turned back to her cabin, her chest tight with an ache she couldn't name. The wolf had been a stranger, a wild thing she'd saved on impulse. It didn't owe her anything. This was the natural order: heal, release, move on. So why did the cabin feel colder now? She spent the day restoring order, washed the blood-stained furs, reorganized her depleted pantry, reinforced the shutters the storm had battered. Practical tasks to keep her hands busy and her mind from spiraling. By evening, exhaustion dragged at her bones, the kind that came from 3 days of interrupted sleep and constant vigilance. Elara made herself a simple meal of rice and dried berries, eating mechanically by the fire. The cabin was too quiet. For 3 days she'd had company, even if that company couldn't speak. Now the silence pressed in from all sides, suffocating. This is what you wanted, she reminded herself. No pack, no expectations, no one to disappoint. The fire crackled in response, indifferent. She was banking the coals for the night when she heard it. Footsteps. Not the soft pad of animal paws, but the unmistakable crunch of boots on snow. Multiple boots, moving with military precision. Elara froze, her hand halfway to the fire poker. The footsteps stopped just outside her door. Then came the knock. 3 sharp raps that echoed through the small space like gunshots. Her pulse hammered in her throat. No one came this deep into the wilderness. No one even knew she was here. For 8 months she'd seen exactly 2 people, both trappers passing through who'd barely spared her a glance. The knock came again. Harder. "Elara Frostvale." The voice was male, clipped, authoritative. "Open the door." Ice flooded her veins. They knew her name. Her hand closed around the poker. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. She moved to the door, every muscle tense. "Who are you?" she called. "We're here on behalf of King Rowan Ashgrave, sovereign of the Northern Territories." A pause. "You are not in danger, Miss Frostvale, but we need you to open this door, now." King Rowan Ashgrave. The name hit her like a fist to the gut. Everyone in the northern packs knew that name, even those who lived on the fringes like she did. Rowan Ashgrave was the Alpha King, the apex predator who'd united the fractious wolf clans through a combination of brutal efficiency and terrifying power. He was a legend and a nightmare in equal measure, the kind of wolf whose word was law and whose enemies simply disappeared. What could the Alpha King possibly want with her? "I don't..." Elara's voice cracked. She swallowed and tried again. "I haven't done anything wrong." "Then you have nothing to fear. Open the door." Her hand trembled on the bolt. This was insane. But refusing the king's men would be worse than insane. It would be suicidal. She opened the door. 5 wolves stood in the snow, all in human form, all dressed in the dark gray uniforms of the Royal Guard. They were massive, every one of them radiating the kind of controlled power that came from years of training and absolute confidence. The one who'd spoken, a scarred brute with ice-blue eyes, stepped forward. "Miss Frostvale, you will come with us." "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. The guard's expression didn't change. The king requires your presence. That is all you need to know. But I live alone. I haven't had contact with any pack in months. I can't possibly... Now, Miss Frostvale. The command in his voice left no room for argument. Elara's mind raced. She could refuse, force them to drag her, but these were the king's elite, and she was one Omega with a fire poker. There was no scenario where resistance ended well for her. "Can I at least get my cloak?" she asked quietly. The guard nodded once. Elara turned back into the cabin, her thoughts spiraling. This didn't make sense. She was nobody, a rejected Omega living in exile. Why would... Her eyes fell on the hearth, on the scorched stones and the faint outline of soot marks too large to be from smoke alone. The wolf. Oh no. "Miss Frostvale." The guard's voice cut through her dawning horror. "We don't have all night." Elara grabbed her grandmother's cloak with numb fingers and followed the guards into the frozen darkness, her heart pounding one truth over and over. She'd saved something far more dangerous than she'd realized, and now the Alpha King himself was coming to collect. The journey to the king's stronghold took 2 days of relentless travel through mountain passes that would have killed Elara without the guards' brutal efficiency. They moved in formation, never speaking except to bark orders, their silence more unnerving than any threat. Elara rode a borrowed horse, her hands numb inside wool mittens, her mind spinning with questions no one would answer. Why had they come for her? What did the Alpha King want? And most terrifying of all, had she somehow broken a law she didn't even know existed by saving that wolf? The stronghold materialized from the mountain itself on the second evening, a fortress of black stone that seemed to grow from the bones of the earth. Massive walls rose against the twilight sky, crowned with watchtowers where sentries moved like shadows. The gates were iron-banded oak, thick enough to withstand a siege, carved with symbols that made Elara's wolf instincts shiver. This was a place built for war. The guards led her through a maze of corridors lit by torches that threw dancing shadows on stone walls. Wolves in human form watched her pass, soldiers, servants, courtiers, their eyes tracking her with expressions ranging from curiosity to contempt. Elara kept her head down, her cloak pulled tight, trying to make herself invisible. She failed spectacularly. Whispers followed her like smoke. "That's her? The Omega from the waste? Why would the king summon that? Must be a mistake. Look at her. She's nothing." Each word was a knife between her ribs, perfectly aimed. Elara's cheeks burned, but she forced herself to keep walking. She'd survived 8 months in the wilderness. She could survive this. The lid guard stopped before a set of massive double doors. "Wait here." He disappeared inside, leaving Elara standing in the corridor with the other 4 guards arranged around her like a cage. She studied the floor, counting her breaths, trying not to think about all the ways this could end badly. The doors opened. "The king will see you now." Elara's legs moved on autopilot, carrying her into a great hall that stole the breath from her lungs. The space was cavernous, its vaulted ceiling lost in shadow. A fire roared in a hearth large enough to roast an entire elk. Banners hung from the walls, each bearing the sigil of a different pack, all sworn to the crown, all bent to one will. And at the far end of the hall, seated on a throne of carved obsidian, was the wolf who ruled them all. Rowan Ashgrave. He was bigger than any alpha Elara had ever seen, even sitting. Broad shoulders filled out a black leather tunic adorned with silver clasps. Dark hair fell to his collar, shot through with premature gray at the temples. His face was all hard angles, sharp cheekbones, a jaw that could have been chiseled from granite. A mouth set in a line that suggested smiling was a concept he'd abandoned years ago. But his eyes, silver, molten silver that locked onto her the moment she entered and didn't let go. Elara's breath caught. Those eyes, she knew those eyes. "Closer," Rowan said. His voice was deep, resonant, the kind that commanded without shouting. Elara's feet obeyed before her brain could protest. She crossed the hall, each step echoing in the vast space, until she stood 10 feet from the throne, close enough to see the scars on his hands, the faint line across his throat that spoke of a blade that had come within inches of ending him. "Do you know who I am?" he asked. "Yes." Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "You're King Rowan Ashgrave. And do you know why you're here?" This was it. the moment she'd been dreading. Elara met his gaze and made a choice she knew was probably stupid, but felt necessary anyway. She told the truth. "I think I saved your life 3 days ago." The hall went dead silent. Even the fire seemed to quiet. Rowan leaned forward, his elbows resting on the arms of his throne, his expression unreadable. "Explain." So she did. Elara told him about the storm, the scratching at her door, the dying wolf she'd dragged inside against every instinct. She described the injuries, the hours of tending, the 3 days of strange companionship. She didn't embellish, didn't try to make herself sound braver than she'd been, just laid out the facts in a voice that only trembled once or twice. When she finished, Rowan was silent for a long moment. "You knew it was an alpha," he said finally. "You saw the size, the build. You knew it could kill you even injured." "Yes." "And you saved it anyway." "I couldn't just let it die." "Why not?" The question wasn't cruel, just genuinely curious. In the wild, the strong survive and the weak perish. You could have closed the door, let nature take its course. Instead, you risked your life, your shelter, your supplies. For a stranger, an alpha stranger who could have torn your throat out the moment it recovered. Elara swallowed hard. "Because that's not who I am." "No." Rowan rose from his throne in one fluid motion, and the sheer presence of him standing made Elara take an involuntary step back. He descended the dais, each footfall deliberate, until he stood close enough that she could see the darker flecks in those silver eyes. "It's not. You're the Omega Marcus Ironridge rejected for being too soft, too kind, too weak to stand beside power." Shame flooded through her, hot and acidic. Of course he knew. Of course the Alpha King would know every humiliating detail of her failure. "Yes," she whispered. "Marcus is a fool." Elara's head snapped up. "What?" Rowan's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "I spent 3 days in your cabin, Elara Frostvale. 3 days listening to you talk while you thought I was an animal that couldn't understand. Do you know what I learned?" She couldn't speak, could barely breathe. "I learned that you're lonely, isolated by choice because the world convinced you that compassion was a flaw. I learned that you question yourself constantly, that you wonder if the people who called you weak were right." He paused. "And I learned that despite all of that, when faced with a dying creature on your doorstep, you didn't hesitate. You chose mercy over safety, kindness over survival." "That doesn't make me strong," Elara said, her voice cracking. "That makes me stupid." "Does it?" Rowan reached up and loosened the collar of his tunic. Beneath, Elara saw the edge of bandages. Her bandages, the ones she'd applied with shaking hands in the firelight. "These wounds would have killed me if you'd left me in that storm. I am the Alpha King, Elara. I command 12 packs, 3,000 wolves, more territory than any single ruler has held in 4 generations. And I would have died in the snow if not for an Omega who everyone said was too weak to matter." The words hit her like a physical blow. Elara stared at him, her mind reeling. "Why are you telling me this?" she managed. Rowan's gaze didn't waver. "Because you need to understand what happened in that cabin. When a wolf's life is saved by another, when trust is given in a moment of absolute vulnerability, a bond forms. It's old magic, older than the packs, older than the crown, and it doesn't care about rank or status or what anyone thinks is appropriate." Elara's heart stuttered. "A bond. Yes. Between us." "Yes," she laughed. It came out sharp, almost hysterical. "That's impossible. You're the Alpha King. I'm nobody. I'm the Omega who couldn't even keep her own pack's respect. You can't be bonded to me." "And yet I am." Rowan's voice was calm, implacable. "I felt it form during those 3 days. Every word you spoke, every gentle touch when you tended my wounds, every moment you chose to care for me instead of protecting yourself, it wove something between us that can't be undone." "Then break it," Elara said desperately. "You're the king. Surely you have the power to—" "I don't want to break it." The world tilted. Elara grabbed for the edge of a nearby table to steady herself. "You don't—" "What?" Rowan stepped closer, not threatening, but intentional. "For 12 years I've ruled these territories with strength and fear. I've crushed rebellions, executed traitors, made decisions that cost lives because they were necessary for the greater good. And in all that time, not one wolf has looked at me the way you did when you thought I was dying. Not with fear or ambition or calculation. With care. Pure, uncomplicated care for a suffering creature. That's not... You can't make this decision based on... Elara's words tumbled over each other. I don't belong here. Look at me. Look at this place. I'm a hermit who lives in a shack and talks to herself. Your court will eat me alive. Let them try. The edge in Rowan's voice could have cut steel. You saved the king's life, Elara. That makes you untouchable. Saving your life doesn't mean I can be your... She couldn't even say it. The word was too big, too impossible. My mate, Rowan finished quietly. My queen. The hall spun. Elara pressed her hands to her face, trying to breathe, trying to think through the roaring in her ears. This was insane. 24 hours ago, she'd been alone in her cabin. Now the most powerful alpha in the north was telling her they were bonded, and he wanted her to be his queen. Can't, she whispered. Why not? Because I'll fail. The words exploded out of her. Because I don't know how to be what you need. I don't know politics or strategy or how to command respect. I'm the wolf who gets walked over, who gives too much and asks for nothing. Marcus was right about me. Everyone was right. I'm not built for power. Rowan caught her wrist gently, stopping her retreat. You're right. You're not built for the kind of power that comes from domination and fear. But there's another kind. The kind that comes from knowing when to show mercy, when to heal instead of harm, when to choose compassion even when it costs you. His silver eyes held hers. This kingdom has enough wolves who know how to destroy. It needs someone who remembers how to save. You're asking me to be something I'm not. I'm asking you to be exactly what you are. Rowan released her wrist but didn't step back. And I'm offering you a choice. Stay here, beside me. Let me show you that the qualities your pack called weaknesses are exactly what this kingdom desperately needs. Or walk away. Return to your cabin, your isolation, your safety. I won't stop you. You won't? Elara searched his face for the lie. No, the bond doesn't make you my prisoner. It makes you my equal. He paused. But know this. If you leave, you'll spend the rest of your life wondering what you might have become if you'd been brave enough to try. The word struck home like an arrow. Elara thought of her cabin, of the endless silence, of waking each day to prove she didn't need anyone. She thought of the wolf she'd saved, broken and bleeding on her doorstep, and the choice she'd made without thinking. The stupid, reckless, kind choice. I need time, she said finally. Rowan nodded. You'll have it, but there's something you should see first. He led her to the windows that lined the eastern wall. Outside, the courtyard was filled with wolves, hundreds of them, all in human form, all dressed in the finery of the court. They stood in clusters, talking in low voices, their expressions ranging from bored to hostile. My council, Rowan said, the pack leaders and their lieutenants. They're gathering for the winter summit, where we determine policy for the coming year. Food distribution, territorial disputes, alliances. The decisions made in that room will affect every wolf in the north. Elara watched them, her stomach knotting. These were the powerful ones, the alphas, and their chosen, the kind of wolves who'd stood silent while Marcus tore her down. What does this have to do with me? She asked. Everything. Because if you accept my offer, you'll sit in that room beside me. You'll have a voice in those decisions. And there will be wolves, many wolves, who think you have no right to be there. As if summoned by his words, a commotion erupted in the courtyard. A knot of wolves had formed around two figures arguing near the fountain. Elara recognized one of them instantly. Marcus Ironridge. He looked exactly as she remembered, tall, powerfully built, his dark hair pulled back in a style that emphasized his sharp features. He wore deep blue silks that marked him as a rising star among the packs, and he was sneering at someone Elara couldn't quite see through the crowd. What's happening? She asked. Rowan's jaw tightened. Marcus arrived this morning for the summit. He's been making trouble ever since. The crowd shifted, and Elara saw Marcus's target, a smaller wolf, elderly, holding a basket of what looked like medical supplies. The old wolf was backing away, head bowed, while Marcus advanced. Useless traditions, Marcus's voice carried through the glass. We don't need healers who coddle the weak. Natural selection serves the pack better than your herbs and sympathy. Elara's hands clenched into fists. She knew that dismissive tone, had heard it directed at her 100 times. I should go down there, Rowan said, but Elara was already moving. She didn't think, didn't plan, just walked out of the hall, down the stairs, into the courtyard. The cold bit through her simple dress, but she barely felt it. All she could see was Marcus. All she could hear was that sneering contempt, and something inside her that had been bending for months finally snapped straight. That's enough, her voice rang across the courtyard. Every head turned. The conversations died. Marcus's sneer transformed into an expression of pure shock. Elara? He said her name like an accusation. What are you doing here? She crossed to the elderly healer and positioned herself between him and Marcus, stopping you from being cruel to someone who doesn't deserve it. Marcus recovered quickly, his shock melting into amusement. Still playing protector to the worthless, I see. Tell me, how has that worked out for you? Last I heard, you were hiding in the mountains like a coward. I left because I got tired of watching wolves like you mistake cruelty for strength. Wolves like me? Marcus stepped closer, using his height to loom over her. I'm a pack leader now, Elara. Recognized, respected, powerful. While you've been nursing rabbits in the woods, I've been building something that matters. So forgive me if I don't take lectures from an Omega who couldn't cut it in the real world. The gathered wolves murmured. Some laughed. Elara felt the familiar shame trying to claw its way up her throat. The old voice that said Marcus was right. She was nothing. She should just apologize and disappear. But then she remembered silver eyes watching her in firelight, remembered strong hands that had been gentle even in pain, remembered a king telling her that mercy wasn't weakness. You're right, she said quietly. I couldn't cut it in your world, because your world values domination over compassion, power over kindness, winning over caring, and I want no part of it. Then why are you here? Marcus demanded. Because the king summoned me. That stopped him. Marcus's eyes narrowed. Why would King Rowan summon you? Before Elara could answer, a voice cut through the courtyard like a blade. Because she saved my life. Every wolf in the courtyard dropped immediately to one knee. Even Marcus, his face draining of color, sank down. Only Elara remained standing, turning to see Rowan descending the steps with deadly grace. He crossed to her side, and the possessive way he angled his body, close enough that their shoulders almost touched, sent a clear message to everyone watching. Rise, Rowan commanded. The wolves obeyed. Marcus was staring at Elara like she'd grown a second head. There must be some mistake, Your Majesty, he said carefully. Elara Frostvale is a rejected Omega from my former pack. Surely she couldn't have saved the Alpha King's life during the blizzard? Rowan's voice was silk over steel. But she did. While I was wounded and dying in the storm, this Omega, this wolf you deemed too weak to matter, dragged me into her cabin and spent 3 days ensuring I survived. She asked nothing in return, expected nothing, simply chose mercy because that's who she is. The courtyard was dead silent. Elara could feel hundreds of eyes on her, reassessing, recalculating. I see, Marcus said slowly. His gaze flickered between them, and Elara saw the exact moment he understood. My congratulations on your rescue, Your Majesty, though I'm sure any wolf would have done the same. Would they? Rowan's eyes were chips of ice. You just spent 5 minutes berating an elderly healer for showing compassion. Forgive me if I doubt your commitment to mercy. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he was smart enough not to argue with the king. Of course, Your Majesty. I misspoke. You did more than misspeak. You revealed exactly what's wrong with how too many of our packs operate. Rowan's voice carried across the courtyard, addressing everyone now. We've built a culture that treats kindness as liability and compassion as weakness. We've taught our young that the only strength that matters is the strength to dominate. And in doing so, we've lost something essential. He turned to Elara, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. This Omega represents what we've forgotten. She had every reason to leave me in that storm. I was a stranger, a potential threat, a drain on her resources. But she chose to save me anyway. Not because she hoped for reward or feared punishment, because saving lives is what she does. Because mercy is woven into her bones. Rowan's hand found hers, his fingers warm and solid. Elara's heart hammered so hard she was sure the entire courtyard could hear it. I'm not asking this kingdom to abandon strength, Rowan continued. But I am demanding that we remember strength comes in many forms, and sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose kindness when the world tells you it's foolish. He raised their joined hands. Elara Frostvale has agreed to consider becoming my mate and your queen. I expect every wolf in this kingdom to treat her with the respect that position deserves. The courtyard erupted. Elara barely heard the shocked whispers, the gasps, the few scattered cheers. All she could process was Rowan's hand in hers and the weight of hundreds of stares. "I didn't agree," she hissed under her breath. "You didn't refuse," Rowan murmured back. "Close enough." Marcus looked like he'd swallowed glass. "Your Majesty, surely this is unprecedented. An Omega Queen? The Pax will do as their king commands," Rowan said flatly. "Unless you'd like to challenge that authority." It was a trap, and everyone knew it. Marcus's hands clenched at his sides, but he forced his head down. "No, Your Majesty." "Good. Now apologize to Healer Brennan for your disrespect." For a moment, Elara thought Marcus would refuse. His pride was a living thing, and bowing to an elderly healer in front of the entire court would shred it. But Rowan's stare didn't leave room for defiance. "My apologies," Marcus gritted out. The healer, Brennan, nodded graciously, though his hands trembled on his basket. Elara wanted to go to him, to make sure he was truly all right, but Rowan's grip on her hand kept her anchored. "The summit begins tomorrow at dawn," Rowan announced to the courtyard. "I suggest you all use tonight to adjust your expectations. Change is coming to the Northern Territories. Learn to embrace it." He turned and led Elara back into the fortress, his pace brisk enough that she had to jog to keep up. Only when they were alone in a corridor did he finally stop and release her hand. "What did you just do?" Elara demanded, her voice shaking. "You told them I'd agreed." "I gave you armor," Rowan interrupted. "That courtyard was full of wolves looking for weakness, for any excuse to dismiss or attack you. By claiming you publicly, by making it clear you have my protection, I've drawn a line. Cross you, and they cross me." "You should have asked first." "Would you have said yes?" Elara opened her mouth, then closed it. No. She would have panicked, would have refused, would have run, and Rowan knew it. "You're manipulating me," she accused. "I'm protecting you. There's a difference." He leaned against the wall, some of the king's authority bleeding away to reveal the exhaustion beneath. "I told you the bond was real, Elara. That means when you hurt, I feel it. When you're threatened, every instinct I have screams to defend you. What I did out there wasn't manipulation. It was inevitability. I don't want to be inevitable." Elara wrapped her arms around herself. "I want to be a choice. You are my choice. The question is whether I'm yours." Before Elara could answer, rapid footsteps echoed down the corridor. One of the royal guards appeared, his face grim. "Your Majesty, forgive the interruption, but there's a situation." Rowan straightened instantly. "What kind of situation?" "The Blackwater Pack has arrived for the summit. Their alpha is demanding an immediate audience." "Blackwater?" Rowan's expression darkened. "They're not due until tomorrow." "They claim it's urgent, sire. Something about border violations and missing wolves." Elara saw the shift happen in real time. The exhausted man vanishing, replaced by the Alpha King. Rowan's shoulders squared, his jaw set, every line of his body radiating command. "Take me to them," he said. Then to Elara. "We'll finish this conversation later." "Wait," Elara called as he started to walk away. "What am I supposed to do?" Rowan paused. "Whatever you want. You're not a prisoner here." He gestured to the guard. "Garrett will show you to your chambers. Rest, eat, explore. Just stay inside the fortress walls. Not all my guests are as welcoming as Marcus." The sarcasm in that last word almost made Elara smile. Almost. She watched him disappear down the corridor, then followed Garrett through a maze of passages to a suite of rooms that made her cabin look like a doghouse. There was a bedroom with an actual feather bed, a sitting room with cushioned chairs, even a private bathing chamber with a copper tub. "The staff will bring dinner shortly," Garrett said. "If you need anything, pull the bell cord." Then she was alone. Elara sank into one of the chairs and stared at the fire someone had already lit in the hearth. Her mind spun in circles, trying to process everything that had happened. The king. The bond. Marcus's face when Rowan had claimed her publicly. The weight of hundreds of wolves judging whether she deserved to exist in their world. She thought about the elderly healer, how quickly Marcus had dismissed him. Thought about Rowan's words in the courtyard, about strength coming in many forms. Could she really do this? Could she stand beside a king and not crumble under the weight? A knock at the door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Elara opened it to find not a servant, but healer Brennan himself, his basket in hand and a gentle smile on his weathered face. "Miss Frostvale," he said warmly, "forgive the intrusion. I wanted to thank you properly for what you did in the courtyard." "You don't need to thank me," Elara said, stepping aside to let him enter. "Marcus had no right to speak to you that way." Perhaps not, but few would have said so. Brennan settled into a chair with the careful movements of old joints, especially not an Omega facing down an Alpha Pack leader in front of the entire court. Elara shrugged, uncomfortable. "I wasn't thinking." "On the contrary, you were thinking very clearly. You saw someone being hurt and you stepped in." His eyes twinkled. "The king chose well." "He didn't choose. The bond chose for him." "Did it?" Brennan tilted his head. "Or did the bond simply reveal what was already there? I've been a healer for 60 years, child. I've seen many bonds form, and I've never seen one take root where there wasn't fertile ground." Elara sat across from him. "What does that mean?" "It means bonds don't create compatibility. They recognize it. King Rowan is strong, yes, powerful, but he's also been lonely for longer than most realize, carrying the weight of a kingdom with no one to share the burden." Brennan leaned forward. "Then you appear. A wolf who knows exactly what it's like to be isolated, to be judged, to wonder if kindness is a fatal flaw. Is it any surprise the bond found purchase? But I can't be what he needs. What this kingdom needs. Can't you?" Brennan gestured to his basket. "These are herbs for healing. Individually, they're nothing special. Yarrow stops bleeding. Willow bark eases pain. But combined correctly, they become something greater than the sum of their parts." He met her eyes. "You and the king are like that. His strength, your compassion, his authority, your mercy. Separately, you're formidable. Together, you could transform this kingdom. Or I could fail spectacularly and drag him down with me. That's always the risk with anything worth doing." Brennan stood, gathering his basket. "But I'll tell you this. I've lived through 4 kings, and I've never heard one speak about another wolf the way Rowan spoke about you tonight. Whatever you decide, know that he already sees in you what you can't yet see in yourself." He left her with that thought and a small pouch of chamomile tea for sleeping. Elara didn't sleep. She paced the rooms, tried the tea, stared out the windows at the fortress grounds. Somewhere in this massive stone labyrinth, Rowan was dealing with the Blackwater crisis. Somewhere, Marcus was probably plotting how to undermine her. Somewhere, hundreds of wolves were gossiping about the Omega who'd somehow captured the Alpha King's attention. And here she was, terrified and tempted in equal measure. Just before dawn, unable to bear the confinement any longer, Elara slipped out of her rooms. The corridors were quiet, most of the fortress still sleeping. She wandered without direction, letting her feet carry her deeper into the complex. She found herself in what looked like a training yard. Even at this hour, a few early risers were sparring, practicing combat forms, testing strength and speed. Elara leaned against a pillar and watched, envying their certainty. They knew exactly what they were built for. Fight, protect, serve. Simple. "You're up early." Elara spun to find a woman watching her from across the yard. She was maybe 10 years older than Elara, with short dark hair and a scar that traced her jawline. Her posture screamed warrior, balanced, ready, dangerous. "Couldn't sleep," Elara admitted. The woman crossed to her. "I'm Kara Stonefang, captain of the Royal Guard." "Elara Frostvale." "I know who you are." Kara's smile was wry. "Everyone knows who you are after yesterday's show in the courtyard. That took guts, by the way. Standing up to Marcus Ironridge in front of the whole court. Or stupidity. Sometimes they're the same thing." Kara leaned against the pillar beside her. "Can I give you some advice? Alpha to Omega?" "You're an alpha?" "Born and raised, earned my position by being meaner and tougher than every wolf who tried to take it from me." Kara's expression sobered. "Which is why I'm telling you this. You're going to face opposition here. Wolves who think Omegas don't belong in power. Wolves who resent the king's choice. They'll test you, push you, try to make you break. I know. Do you? Kara's eyes were sharp. Because here's what they won't expect, you fighting back. Not with claws or teeth, but with the thing that makes you dangerous. I'm not dangerous. You absolutely are. You made the Alpha King feel something. In 12 years of brutal rule, no one's managed that. You cracked his armor just by being kind to him when he was vulnerable. Do you have any idea how terrifying that is to people invested in the current power structure? Elara stared at her. I don't understand. If an Omega can influence the king, if compassion can change policy, then everything the Alphas have built their dominance on becomes questionable. You're not just a woman standing beside the throne, Elara. You're a revolution wrapped in kindness. And revolutions scare the hell out of people who benefit from the status quo. Before Elara could respond, bells began ringing across the fortress, deep, resonant tones that vibrated in her chest. Summit's starting, Kara said, and you're expected to attend. Elara's stomach dropped. What? The king's orders. You're to sit beside him during the proceedings. Kara pushed off the pillar. Come on, I'll walk you there. And Elara? Whatever happens in that room, remember, you saved the king's life. That's not a debt anyone can diminish, no matter how hard they try. The summit chamber was even more intimidating than the Great Hall, circular, with tiers of stone benches rising toward a domed ceiling painted with constellations. Pack leaders sat in order of seniority, their lieutenants behind them, all watching as Elara entered. Rowan sat at the chamber's center in a throne that looked carved from a single piece of black marble. When he saw her, something in his expression eased. He gestured to the smaller throne beside his. Elara. Every eye in the room tracked her as she climbed the steps. She could feel their judgment like a physical weight. Too small, too weak, too Omega. She sat. Rowan leaned close, his voice pitched for her ears only. You don't have to speak unless you want to. Just observe. But your presence matters. Why? Because it announces that things are changing, and change requires witnesses. The proceedings began. For hours, Elara listened to pack leaders argue about territorial boundaries, trade agreements, food distribution for the harsh winter ahead. Some arguments were civil, others devolved into barely contained snarling. Rowan mediated with iron control, his decisions swift and final. And through it all, Elara sat silent, watching, learning, until Marcus Ironridge stood to speak. Your Majesty, he said smoothly, I have a proposal regarding Omega integration and pack hierarchy. Elara's skin prickled with warning. Speak, Rowan commanded. As we all know, Omegas serve a vital role in pack structure, caregiving, support, maintaining harmony. But in recent years, there's been concerning push to elevate Omegas beyond their natural position, to give them authority they're not equipped to handle. Marcus's eyes flicked to Elara for just a second. Message received. I propose we formalize Omega roles, create clear guidelines about what positions they can hold, what decisions they're permitted to influence. For their own protection, of course. We wouldn't want to place them in situations where their gentle natures might be exploited. Several pack leaders nodded. Elara's hands clenched in her lap. This proposal, Marcus continued, would ensure Omegas remain valued while preventing the instability that comes from blurred hierarchies. He sat down, looking pleased with himself. The chamber erupted in debate. Some alphas supported the idea. Others called it regressive. Voices rose, overlapping, arguing, and Elara felt something inside her catch fire. She stood. The chamber fell silent. Rowan glanced at her, surprised but not stopping her. Permission to speak, Elara said. Her voice shook, but it carried. Rowan nodded. Elara faced the assembled wolves. Alpha Marcus's proposal sounds reasonable, protective even. But let's be honest about what it really is, a cage dressed up as safety. Marcus's smile vanished. You want to formalize Omega roles, Elara continued, define what we can and cannot do? All while claiming it's for our own good? She let her gaze sweep the room. I was an Omega in a traditional pack. I lived by those protective rules. And when I showed kindness, when I cared for the weak, I was called soft. When I questioned why we couldn't do better, I was called naive. And when the alpha I was supposed to respect rejected me for not being hard enough, everyone agreed he was right. Her hands were trembling, but she didn't stop. So I left. I survived 8 months alone in the wilderness you all claim Omegas are too weak to handle. I hunted, I built shelter, I endured storms that would have killed half the wolves in this room. And when a dying alpha collapsed on my doorstep, I saved his life. She turned to Marcus. You want to protect Omegas from instability? How about protecting us from alphas who mistake cruelty for strength? How about creating a system where our compassion is valued instead of weaponized against us? How about acknowledging that gentle natures can coexist with capability, intelligence, and power? The chamber was frozen. I don't need your protection, Alpha Marcus, Elara said quietly. None of us do. What we need is the freedom to prove you wrong. She sat down. For 3 heartbeats, no one moved. Then Rowan spoke, his voice cutting through the shocked silence. Proposal denied. Marcus's face went white. Your Majesty. Denied, Rowan repeated. And any alpha who brings a similar proposal will answer to me personally. This summit is dismissed. The wolves filed out in stunned silence. Elara sat frozen in her throne, unable to believe what she'd just done. Rowan waited until they were alone, then turned to her with an expression she couldn't quite read. I didn't mean to, she started. That, Rowan interrupted, is exactly who I need beside me. And despite everything, the fear, the uncertainty, the weight of what she'd just ignited, Elara felt something unfurl in her chest. Something that felt dangerously like hope. The hope lasted exactly 4 hours. Elara spent those hours in a daze, replaying her speech in the summit chamber, barely able to process that she'd actually stood before the most powerful alphas in the north and challenged them. Rowan had arranged for her to have access to the fortress library, a cavern of books that smelled like aged leather and pine smoke, and she'd retreated there to escape the stairs that followed her through every corridor. She was reading about Northern Pack history, trying to understand the world she'd stumbled into, when Kara Stonefang found her. One look at the guard captain's face told Elara the reprieve was over. You need to come with me, Kara said, her voice tight. Now. Elara closed the book. What happened? Marcus happened, and it's bad. They moved through the fortress at a near run, Kara's hand on her sword hilt. Wolves pressed against the corridor walls to let them pass, their expressions ranging from curious to hostile. The whispers started before Elara was even out of earshot. Challenged the king's authority. Omega doesn't know her place. Going to get herself killed. Kara led her to a wing of the fortress Elara hadn't seen before. The administrative heart, where pack business was conducted away from the grand halls. They stopped before a heavy oak door flanked by 2 guards who looked like they'd been carved from granite. Inside, Rowan stood behind a massive desk covered in maps and documents, his expression thunderous. Marcus Ironridge sat across from him, looking smug despite the king's obvious fury. 3 other pack leaders occupied chairs along the wall, their faces carefully neutral. Rowan's eyes found Elara the moment she entered. Close the door! Kara obeyed and took up position beside it, her hand still on her weapon. Explain to her what you just told me, Rowan said to Marcus, his voice dangerously quiet. Marcus stood with the unhurried confidence of a man who knew he held winning cards. Of course, Your Majesty. Miss Frostvale, I've just informed the king that I'm formally invoking the right of contest. The words meant nothing to Elara. She looked at Rowan confused. It's an ancient law, Rowan said, each word clipped. One I haven't had invoked in 6 years. It allows any pack leader to challenge a major royal decision if they can prove it endangers the stability of the kingdom. What decision? But even as Elara asked, ice formed in her stomach. She already knew. Your elevation, Marcus said smoothly. Your presence at the summit today was a clear signal that the king intends to make you his mate and queen. I'm challenging that decision on the grounds that an Omega in such a position violates pack law and threatens our social structure. There is no pack law against it, Rowan snapped. No explicit law, perhaps, but precedent is clear. In 400 years of recorded pack history, no Omega has ever held the position of queen. The role requires strength, political acumen, the ability to command respect from alphas across 12 territories. With all due respect to Miss Frostvale, she possesses none of these qualities. Elara's nails bit into her palms. She forced herself to stay quiet, to let Rowan handle this. Your challenge is noted and dismissed, Rowan said flatly. This meeting is over. I'm afraid it's not that simple, Your Majesty. Marcus gestured to the other pack leaders. Alpha Thorn of Blackwater, Alpha Vera of Ironwood, and Alpha Chen of Stormbreak have all signed the petition supporting my challenge. That's 4 of the 12 pack leaders. Enough to invoke the second right. Rowan went very still. You wouldn't. I have. The documents are filed with the Council of Elders. It's done. Someone explain what's happening, Elara said, her voice cutting through the tension. In words I can understand. Rowan's jaw worked. When he spoke, he sounded like he was choking on glass. The second right requires that contested decisions be proven through trial. If 4 or more pack leaders invoke it, the king must either withdraw the decision or submit to a test that demonstrates the wisdom of the choice. What kind of test? That depends on the nature of the challenge. Marcus's smile was a blade. In this case, since the challenge is about your fitness to be queen, the test would evaluate your capability to fulfill that role. Fine, Elara lifted her chin. Tell me what I need to do. Elara, no, Rowan started, but Marcus was already speaking. The test is threefold. First, a demonstration of political knowledge. You'll be questioned by the Council of Elders on pack law, history, and governance. Second, a trial of leadership. You'll be given a crisis scenario and must make decisions that protect the kingdom's interests. Third, and most importantly, a challenge of worth. The way he said those last words made Elara's skin crawl. Which is, she pressed. Marcus's smile widened. Single combat, against an opponent chosen by the challenging alphas. Victory proves you have the strength to stand beside the king. Defeat proves you don't. The room tilted. Elara grabbed the edge of the desk to steady herself. Combat. You want me to fight someone? Not just someone. An alpha warrior of our choosing. In the traditional form, shifted, no weapons, fight until submission or death. That's murder, Kara snarled from the door. You're setting her up to be killed. I'm following pack law, Marcus said mildly. Unless Miss Frostvale would like to withdraw? I'm sure the king would understand if you admitted this position is beyond your capabilities. Elara looked at Rowan. His hands were braced on the desk, knuckles white with strain. Their eyes met, and she saw something in his expression that made her heart crack. Defeat. He thought she would lose. More than that, he thought she would die. There has to be another way, Rowan said. I'll withdraw the decision. Elara can remain here under my protection without the formal title. No, Elara interrupted. Every head turned to her. No, Rowan repeated, disbelief coloring his tone. If I don't take this test, if I hide behind your protection, then Marcus wins. Not just this challenge, everything. Because every Omega in this kingdom will learn the lesson that we can't rise, can't lead, can't be anything except what alphas decide we're allowed to be. Elara's voice steadied as she spoke, the fear transmuting into something harder. I won't do that. I won't prove him right. Elara, you don't understand what you're agreeing to. The combat trial, they'll choose their best fighter, someone trained since childhood to kill. You'll be slaughtered. Maybe. But at least I'll go down fighting instead of cowering. She turned to Marcus. I accept your challenge. All 3 parts. Marcus's smile could have lit the room. Excellent. The trials will begin in 3 days. That should give you time to prepare. The pause before that last word was deliberate mockery. Get out, Rowan said, his voice lethal. All of you. Now. The pack leaders filed out with varying degrees of smugness. Marcus was the last to leave, pausing at the door to deliver one final barb. For what it's worth, Miss Frostvale, I do admire your courage. It's a shame it won't be enough. The door closed behind him. Silence crashed down like a physical weight. Elara couldn't look at Rowan, couldn't face what she knew she'd see in his eyes. You just signed your death warrant, he said quietly. I signed a chance to prove everyone wrong. This isn't about proving anything. This is about survival. Rowan crossed to her in 3 strides, his hands gripping her shoulders. Elara, listen to me. The fighter they choose will be brutal, experienced, and utterly without mercy. You've never trained for combat. You've never shifted into battle form. You'll last maybe 90 seconds before they tear you apart. Then teach me. In 3 days? That's not even remotely. Then I'll learn fast. Elara met his gaze. You told me I was strong, that my compassion mattered. Were you lying? Of course not, but Schwam. Then trust it. Trust me. She softened her voice. Rowan, if I run from this, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering if I could have done it. I'll be that rejected Omega who proved Marcus right. I can't live with that. I won't. His hands tightened on her shoulders, then released. He turned away, one hand dragging through his hair. You're going to die, and I'm going to have to watch it happen because pack law won't let me intervene. I'm not going to die. How can you possibly know that? Because I survived 8 months in the wilderness that should have killed me a dozen times over. Because I saved the life of the most dangerous alpha alive without even knowing who he was. Because I've spent my whole life being underestimated, and I'm done accepting that as truth. Rowan was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw. If you do this, if you actually go through with these trials, you need to understand something. The bond between us means I'll feel every wound you take. Every moment of your pain will be mine. And if you die... He didn't finish the sentence. Elara crossed to him and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers with desperate strength. Then don't let me die, she said simply. Train me, push me, make me dangerous enough to survive. 3 days isn't enough time. Then we'd better not waste any of it. Kara stepped forward. I'll help. I can teach her basic combat forms, how to use her smaller size as an advantage. She needs more than basics, Rowan cut in. She needs to learn how to kill. The word hung in the air like smoke. Can you do that? He asked Elara. Can you take another wolf's life if that's what survival requires? Elara thought of the wolf she'd saved, bleeding and broken on her doorstep. Thought of the hours she'd spent keeping it alive. Every instinct she had screamed against the idea of doing the opposite. But she thought too of Marcus's sneer, of the Omega healers and caregivers who'd spend their lives being dismissed, of the hope that had flickered in Healer Brennan's eyes when she'd defended him. If it's me or them, she said. Yes, I can. Rowan searched her face, looking for doubt. Whatever he found there made him nod once, sharp and decisive. Then we start now. Kara, clear the training yards. I don't want an audience. And find me someone who can teach her to shift under pressure. She'll need full control of both forms. There's a problem with that, Your Majesty, Kara said carefully. To really prepare her, she needs to train against opponents who won't pull their punches. But if anyone injures her before the trials, Marcus will claim we violated the spirit of the challenge. So we train carefully. Carefully won't prepare her for what's coming. Rowan's expression went cold. Then we train brutally and hide the evidence. Brennan can be discreet. They spent the next 16 hours turning Elara into something other than what she'd been. Kara drilled her on basic combat stances until Elara's legs shook with exhaustion. How to balance, how to read an opponent's tells, how to protect vital areas while still maintaining offensive capability. It was a crash course that should have taken months compressed into a single brutal session. You're thinking too much, Kara barked after Elara missed a parry for the 5th time. Combat isn't a debate, it's instinct. When they come at you, your body needs to react before your brain catches up. My body's instinct is to run away, Elara gasped, wiping sweat from her eyes. Then we changed the instinct. Again. They trained until Elara's hands were raw and bleeding, until her body moved through the forms in a fugue state of pain and repetition, until Kara finally called a halt and half-carried her to the bathing chambers. You did better than I expected, Kara admitted, helping Elara into the steaming water. You're quick, that'll help. I'm going to die, aren't I? Kara's silence was answer enough. The next day, Rowan took over. He brought Elara to a private chamber deep in the fortress, warded with enough magic that no sound would escape. The room was bare stone, slightly curved, with drainage channels cut into the floor. This is where we train the Royal Guard in lethal combat, Rowan explained. The wards ensure privacy and contain the damage. What happens here stays here. Why do I feel like I should be terrified? Because you're smart. Rowan began removing his tunic. We're going to work on your shifted form. You need to be able to transform instantly, fight effectively in wolf shape, and shift back without losing orientation. Most wolves train for years to master that kind of control.
We have a day and a half. Yes, so we're going to force it. He met her eyes. This is going to hurt, Elara. A lot. I need you to trust that I won't let you die, but I will push you past every limit you think you have. Elara nodded, not trusting her voice. Rowan shifted. One moment he was a man, the next, a massive wolf stood before her, silver-gray fur, silver eyes, radiating such raw power that Alara's knees nearly buckled.
This was the alpha she'd saved, but magnified by intention and awareness. He was beautiful and absolutely terrifying. Shift, his voice echoed in her mind the mental link all wolves shared. Now. Elara had shifted before, of course. Every wolf could, but it had always been a slow, deliberate process. Comfortable. She closed her eyes, reaching for the familiar sensation. Rowan slammed into her. Elara hit the wall hard enough to knock the breath from her lungs. She scrambled up, gasping, just in time to see him coming again. Shift or die, he snarled. Panic blazed through her. Elara dove sideways, barely avoiding his jaws, and felt something inside her crack open. The shift hit like lightning, painful, instant, uncontrolled. One moment she was stumbling on 2 legs, the next she was rolling on 4, her wolf form smaller and faster than Rowan's, but nowhere near as strong. He gave her 3 seconds to orient herself. Then he attacked. What followed was the most brutal education of Elara's life. Rowan came at her again and again, forcing her to react, to dodge, to use her smaller size to slip under his guard. Every time she hesitated, he punished her with a strike that sent her tumbling. Not enough to truly injure, but enough to hurt. Enough to teach. Faster, he commanded. Stop thinking like prey and start thinking like a predator. But Elara wasn't a predator. Every instinct she had screamed to flee, to submit, to make herself small and non-threatening. Rowan sensed it and changed tactics. He pinned her, his jaws closing around her throat, not breaking skin, but applying enough pressure that she felt her pulse hammering against his teeth. If this were real, you'd be dead, he said in her mind. Is that acceptable to you? Rage ignited in her chest. Not acceptable. Not even slightly. Elara twisted, using a move Kara had drilled into her, and managed to slip free. She spun and lunged, her teeth finding purchase on Rowan's shoulder. He could have thrown her off easily. Instead, he let her maintain the hold for 3 seconds before knocking her away. Better. Again. They trained for 6 hours straight, shifted and human and shifted, until Elara could transform mid-movement without conscious thought, until her body understood that hesitation meant death, until something feral and fighting woke up in her chest and started snarling back. When Rowan finally called a halt, Elara collapsed in human form on the stone floor, her entire body screaming. Blood seeped from a dozen small wounds, training injuries that Rowan had been careful to keep superficial but couldn't entirely avoid. He shifted back and knelt beside her. You're getting stronger. I'm dying. Not yet. He produced a flask of water and helped her drink. But you're going to have to go darker than this, Elara. In that arena, your opponent won't stop when you're hurt. They'll press harder. Go for the kill. You need to be willing to do the same. I don't know if I can. Rowan's hand cupped her cheek, gentle despite the bruises they'd just inflicted on each other. You can. You're capable of more than you realize. But you have to let go of the part of you that wants to save everyone. In that fight, there's only one life that matters. Yours. Elara closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. What if letting go of that part means I'm not me anymore? Then you find a way to be both. Fierce enough to survive and kind enough to remember why survival matters. His thumb brushed away a tear she hadn't realized she'd shed. You've already done the impossible, Elara. You made the Alpha King feel hope. Making yourself into a warrior is just the next step. The 3rd day arrived with the weight of an executioner's blade. Elara woke before dawn, every muscle in her body stiff and aching from 3 days of the most intensive training of her life. Kara had brought her a formal gown, deep forest green, simple but elegant, for the first 2 trials. The combat trial would be fought in shifted form, so clothing didn't matter there, if she survived long enough to reach it. Healer Brennan appeared with a breakfast tray and a gentle smile that didn't quite hide his worry. Eat. You'll need your strength. Elara forced down eggs and bread that tasted like ash. Her stomach was a knot of nerves. I heard what you're doing, Brennan said quietly. Standing up to the challenge instead of backing down. It's very brave. Or very stupid. Sometimes they're the same thing. He poured her tea with steady hands. I've prepared what I can for after. Bandages, poultices, bone-setting supplies. That's optimistic. I prefer the term hopeful. Brennan met her eyes.
You've already changed things here, child. Even if you don't win, you've shown every Omega in this kingdom that we can fight back. That matters. Elara nodded, not trusting her voice. The first trial took place in the council chamber, a smaller, more intimate space than the summit hall. The council of elders sat in a semicircle, 5 ancient wolves whose combined age probably exceeded 3 centuries. They looked at Elara with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. Marcus and his supporters occupied seats along the wall, watching like vultures waiting for carrion. The questioning began. For 2 hours, the elders grilled Elara on every aspect of pack governance, historical treaties, border disputes, and their resolutions, the complex web of alliances that held the northern territories together, laws she'd never heard of, traditions she didn't understand. She failed spectacularly. Oh, she tried. Drew on every scrap of information she'd absorbed in 3 days of frantic study. But 3 days couldn't compete with lifetimes of experience. When asked about the Treaty of Iron Ridge and its implications for modern pack law, she fumbled. When questioned about economic policy and trade routes, she guessed wrong. By the time the elders called for a recess, Elara felt hollow. You failed the first trial, Marcus announced with barely concealed glee. The council has ruled you lack sufficient political knowledge to advise the crown. The trial isn't over, Rowan said sharply. There are 2 more parts. Of course, I'm simply noting the score. 1 failure, 2 trials remaining. Marcus smiled. The odds aren't in her favor. The second trial began an hour later. The elders presented Elara with a hypothetical crisis, a border conflict between 2 packs over hunting rights in disputed territory. Both sides had valid claims. Both threatened violence if their demands weren't met. Resources were scarce. Winter was coming. What would she do? Elara stared at the map they'd laid out, her mind racing. This was a test of leadership, of decision-making under pressure. The kind of scenario a queen would face regularly. Her first instinct was to find compromise. Divide the territory, establish a sharing agreement, ensure everyone got something. But even as she opened her mouth to propose it, she remembered Rowan's lessons. Leadership wasn't always about making everyone happy. Sometimes it was about making the hard call. I'd investigate who actually needs the territory more, she said slowly. Not who wants it more. Who needs it? Which pack is facing genuine food shortages? Which one has alternatives? Then I'd grant full rights to the pack in true need and compensate the other with access to different resources. That's not fair to the pack you deny, Elder Moira pointed out. No, but fairness isn't the same as justice. Justice is making sure everyone survives. If one pack can hunt elsewhere and the other can't, justice demands we prioritize survival over ego. And if the denied pack refuses to accept your decision, Elder Thorn pressed. Elara met his eyes. Then I enforce it, with whatever force necessary. Because the alternative is war, which hurts everyone and solves nothing. The elders exchanged glances, whispered among themselves. Acceptable, Elder Moira announced. The candidate demonstrates capacity for difficult decision-making and willingness to enforce necessary outcomes. Marcus's smile slipped. 1 pass, 1 fail, Elder Thorn announced. The challenge comes down to the final trial. Single combat, tomorrow at dawn. That night, Elara couldn't sleep. She lay in her chambers, staring at the ceiling, counting heartbeats. In less than 12 hours, she'd face a warrior specifically chosen to kill her. All her training, all her determination might not be enough. A soft knock broke her spiraling thoughts. It's me, Rowan's voice came through the door. Elara opened it to find him standing in the corridor, looking as exhausted as she felt. Couldn't sleep either? She asked. No. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. I came to ask you one more time. Please withdraw. I'll find another way to protect you. We can... No. Elara? Rowan, listen to me. She took his hands. I know you're scared. I'm terrified too. But backing down now would destroy everything we fought for. It would prove that omegas can't rise, that compassion is weakness, that the old ways are the only ways. I won't do that. Even if it kills you? Even then, because at least I'll die proving I was brave enough to try.
Rowan pulled her into his arms, holding her with a fierceness that bordered on desperation.
I can't lose you. The bond, it's not just magic, Elara. You've become essential. The thought of a world without you in it is unbearable. Elara pressed her face against his chest, feeling his heartbeat thundering against her cheek. Then help me survive. Tell me about the fighter they chose. She felt him tense. His name is Garrett Bloodfang, 32 years old, trained since he was 5.
He's won 47 combat challenges and killed in 17 of them. Marcus chose him specifically because he's methodical. He doesn't end fights quickly. He breaks his opponent slowly. That's meant to scare me. It's meant to prepare you. Garrett will come at you fast and hard, testing your defenses. Once he finds a weakness, he'll exploit it mercilessly. Your only advantage is that he'll underestimate you. He's never faced an Omega in combat. He'll expect you to fold. Then I'll surprise him. Rowan pulled back enough to look at her. In his eyes, she saw fear and pride warring for dominance. Promise me something. What? If it gets too bad, if you're about to die, submit, yield. I don't care about the challenge or the throne or any of it. I'd rather have you alive and powerless than dead and proven right. Elara touched his face. I promise I'll do everything I can to survive, but I won't yield unless I have absolutely no other choice. That's not the promise I wanted. It's the only one I can give. They stood there in the flickering candlelight, holding each other against the approaching dawn. And Elara let herself have this moment, this quiet space before the storm, where she could just be held and be afraid and be human. Tomorrow would demand everything. Tonight, she just needed to not be alone. Dawn came too quickly. The combat arena was a circle of packed earth surrounded by stone tiers where hundreds of wolves had gathered to watch. The entire court, it seemed, had turned out for the spectacle. Some looked curious. Most looked eager for blood. Elara stood at one end of the arena in a simple shift dress that she'd shed before fighting. Her hands were steady, but her heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird. Across from her, Garrett Bloodfang rolled his massive shoulders, already shirtless, clearly comfortable in his own violence. He was built like a siege weapon, all muscle and scars and cold confidence. Marcus stood between them, playing the role of arbiter with obvious relish. The rules are simple, he announced to the crowd. Shifted combat, no weapons. Fight until one party submits or dies. Any outside interference will result in immediate forfeiture and execution of the offending party. That last part was aimed directly at Rowan, who stood in the king's box with an expression carved from granite. Fighters, take your positions, Marcus commanded. Elara walked to her mark, stripped off the dress, let the morning air kiss her skin. Garrett was already shifting, a controlled, fluid transformation that spoke of decades of practice. His wolf form was a brindled monster, easily twice Elara's size, with jaws that could crush bone. Elara reached for her own shift, found it waiting, coiled and ready after 3 days of brutal training. She transformed. The world sharpened, sense exploding into clarity, sounds becoming layered symphonies, her body suddenly lighter and faster and more. Elara's wolf form was small compared to Garrett's, her fur a pale cream that made her look fragile. She wasn't fragile. She was furious. Begin, Marcus shouted. Garrett charged. Elara dodged. His jaws snapped closed on empty air where her throat had been a heartbeat before. She used his momentum against him, darting under his guard to slash at his exposed flank. Her teeth found skin, tore, drew first blood. The crowd roared. Garrett spun faster than something his size should move, his paw catching Elara across the ribs and sending her tumbling. She rolled with it, came up running, circled to put distance between them. Don't let him pin you. Don't let him use his weight. Stay mobile. Stay fast. Rowan's training echoed in her head as Garrett came at her again. They clashed in the center of the arena, a blur of teeth and claws and desperate violence. Elara fought like something possessed, all the rage she'd swallowed over years of being called weak and soft and insufficient pouring out in savage strikes. But Garrett was better, more experienced, and patient. He took the hits she landed, absorbed them, waited for her to make a mistake. She made it 90 seconds in before he caught her. His jaws closed around her hind leg and clamped. Elara felt bone crack, heard herself yelp, tasted fear metallic and overwhelming. Garrett yanked, trying to drag her down, to pin her where his weight advantage would end it. Elara twisted and sank her teeth into his ear. Garrett released her with a snarl, shaking his head. Blood sprayed across the sand. Elara limped backward, her broken leg screaming. She could still put weight on it, but barely, and Garrett knew it. She saw the calculation in his eyes as he stalked toward her. He was done playing. Garrett lunged, going for her throat this time, committed to the kill. And Elara did something completely insane. She lunged toward him, met his charge head-on, sacrificing defense for a desperate gambit. Her teeth found his throat, not the sides, but the front, where the great vessels pulsed beneath fur and skin. She bit down with every ounce of strength she had. Garrett thrashed, trying to throw her off. His claws raked her sides, tearing deep. Pain exploded through Elara's body, but she didn't let go, couldn't let go. This was her only chance. She bit deeper, tasted blood, hot and copper, and so much of it. Garrett's movements became frantic, then desperate, then weak. He was dying. Elara could feel it, the life draining from the massive wolf beneath her jaws. One more second and his throat would tear completely. He'd bleed out in the sand. All she had to do was hold on. But in the thundering chaos of her mind, Elara heard Healer Brennan's voice. Mercy is woven into your bones. Garrett's body went limp. In her peripheral vision, she saw him shift, a forced transformation, his wolf giving out. He lay beneath her in human form, his throat still in her jaws, blood sheeting down his chest. His eyes met hers. He expected death, accepted it. Elara released him. She shifted back to human and staggered away, her own blood dripping from dozens of wounds. Every breath was agony. Her leg wouldn't hold weight, but she was alive, and so was Garrett. Yield, she rasped. Yield or I end it. Garrett coughed, tried to speak, failed, raised one shaking hand in the unmistakable gesture of submission. The arena exploded. Wolves were on their feet, shouting, some in celebration, some in outrage. Marcus looked like he'd swallowed poison. The elders rose from their seats, conferring rapidly. And Rowan vaulted the wall of the king's box and hit the arena floor running. He reached Elara just as her leg gave out, catching her before she could fall. You won, he breathed against her hair. You incredible, insane, impossible woman. You won. Elara laughed. It hurt. Everything hurt. Did I? The Council of Elders recognizes the victory of Elara Frostvale. Elder Moira's voice rang across the arena. The challenge of worth is satisfied. The contest is decided in her favor. Marcus stepped forward, his face twisted with barely controlled rage. She showed mercy. A warrior doesn't show mercy to a defeated enemy. It's a sign of weakness. It's a sign of control, Rowan countered, his voice carrying to every corner of the arena. She had the kill. She chose restraint. That's not weakness, Marcus. That's power you'll never understand. Before Marcus could respond, something strange rippled through the crowd. Wolves turning toward the arena entrance, gasps spreading like wildfire. Elara followed their gazes and felt her blood freeze. Standing at the arena gate was a figure that made every wolf in the vicinity drop to one knee instinctively. A woman, ancient beyond reckoning, her white hair braided with silver thread, her eyes the color of winter storms. She wore robes that seemed woven from moonlight and carried a staff carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly. The seer, someone whispered, and the word spread like flames through dry grass. The seer of the northern wastes, the oracle who appeared once a generation, always heralding change, always heralding catastrophe. She walked into the arena with slow, deliberate steps. Every wolf she passed trembled. Even Rowan's grip on Elara tightened protectively. The seer stopped 3 feet from where they stood, her storm gray eyes fixed on Elara with an intensity that made her want to hide. The Omega who saved the king, the seer said, her voice like wind through ancient trees. The one who showed mercy when violence was expected. I have seen your path, child, and I have come to deliver a warning. Elara's mouth was dry. What warning? The bond between you and the Alpha King was not random chance. It was prophecy made flesh. The seer raised her staff. 100 years ago, it was foretold that an Omega's compassion would either save the Northern Territories or doom them to destruction. You are that Omega, and the choice you make in the days to come will determine which future unfolds. The arena was silent as death. What choice? Rowan demanded. What future? The seer's gaze never left Elara. War is coming, an enemy you've forgotten, but who has not forgotten you. They march from the frozen wastes, and they hunger for blood. The northern packs will need a queen who can unite compassion and strength, mercy, and justice. But to become that queen, Elara Frostvale, you must first face the darkness in your own heart. I don't understand, Elara whispered. You will. The seer stepped back. When the snow runs red and the old powers wake, you will understand everything, and you will have to choose, save the one you love or save the kingdom he rules. Thunder cracked across the clear sky. When the sound faded, the seer was gone. And in the shocked silence that followed, Elara felt something shift in the air, a charge like lightning about to strike, a promise of violence approaching from the north. War was coming, and somehow, impossibly, she stood at the center of it. The war came 3 days later, delivered on winds so cold they turned breath to ice crystals. Elara stood in the war room, her legs still wrapped in bandages from the arena fight, watching as reports flooded in from the northern border, refugees streaming south, entire villages abandoned overnight, and the scouts who ventured too far into the wastes simply vanished. How many missing? Rowan asked, his hands braced on the map table. 17 in the last 48 hours, Kara reported grimly, all experienced trackers. They went in pairs, maintained constant communication until they crossed the frozen divide, then nothing. No bodies. No blood. Just silence. Marcus stood across the table, his alliance with the other challenging alphas fractured by the seer's prophecy, but his hostility toward Elara still simmering beneath forced civility. This is exactly why we need experienced leadership. No offense to your mate, Your Majesty, but an Omega who won a single fight doesn't qualify her to handle a military crisis. And what would you suggest, Marcus? Elara asked before Rowan could respond. Her voice was steady, though fatigue dragged at every word. Send a full battalion after 17 missing wolves? Commit our forces to terrain we don't understand against an enemy we can't see? I'd suggest we stop treating this like a mystery and start treating it like an invasion. Hit them hard before they can establish position. With what intelligence? We don't know their numbers, their capabilities, or even what we're fighting. Elara traced the northern border on the map. The seer said they're an enemy we've forgotten. That suggests something old, something that knows our tactics. Convenient that the seer appeared right after you won your challenge, Marcus said. Almost like this entire crisis is manufactured to justify. Choose your next words very carefully, Rowan interrupted, his voice lethal quiet. Marcus's jaw worked, but he backed down. Barely. A commotion at the war room door broke the tension. One of the scouts, a young woman with wild eyes and frost clinging to her hair, burst in flanked by guards. Your Majesty, she gasped. I saw them. I saw what's taking our people. Every head in the room turned. Report, Rowan commanded. The scout, her name was Lyra, stumbled to the table, shaking so hard the guards had to steady her. I was partnered with Finn for the northern sweep. We crossed the divide just after dawn, following standard patrol protocol. Everything was normal until... She swallowed hard. Until we found the markers. What markers? Kara pressed. Stones. Carved with symbols I've never seen, arranged in circles. Dozens of them, stretching north for miles. And in the center of each circle, her voice broke, bones, wolf bones, arranged like offerings. The room went deathly silent. Where's Finn? Rowan asked quietly. Lyra's eyes filled with tears. The last circle. He stepped inside to get a closer look at the symbols, and the ground just opened, swallowed him whole. No pit, no trapdoor. The earth itself reached up and pulled him down. I heard him screaming for maybe 5 seconds, then nothing. That's impossible, Marcus said flatly. Land doesn't behave like that. Magic does.
Elara said, pieces clicking together in her mind. The seer said we'd forgotten them. What if it's not a who, it's a what? Something we stopped believing in, stopped guarding against. You're talking about the frost walkers, Elder Thorn said from the doorway. He'd arrived silently, his ancient face grave. The servants of winter's darkest aspect. They were banished 400 years ago when the Pax united and drove them beyond the waste.
We thought them destroyed. Apparently not, Rowan said. What do we know about them? Thorn moved to the table with the careful steps of great age. They're not flesh and blood as we understand it. They're winter given form and hunger, sustained by cold, fear, and blood sacrifice. The marker circles are claiming rituals. Each wolf taken feeds their power, lets them push further south. How do we fight them? Kara demanded. You don't. Not directly. The old texts say the Frostwalkers can only be destroyed by returning them to true death, sealing the rift between their realm and ours. But that requires finding the source of their power and severing it. Where's the source? Elara asked. Thorn's expression was bleak. The heart of winter, a place so deep in the frozen wastes that no wolf has reached it and returned in living memory. It's a suicide mission. Then we send our best fighters, Marcus said. A strike team. Fast in, complete the objective, fast out. The best fighters are exactly who the Frostwalkers want, Elara countered. They're feeding on our strength, using it to grow stronger. Sending more powerful wolves just gives them more powerful fuel. So what's your brilliant solution? Marcus's tone was mocking. Send the weakest? Hope they succeed through incompetence? Elara met his gaze. Send someone they won't expect. Someone whose strength isn't in violence. The realization rippled through the room. No, Rowan said immediately. Absolutely not. It makes sense, Elara pressed. The Frostwalkers are hunting warriors. They've set up their claiming circles to trap fighters who rely on aggression and strength. But what if someone approaches differently? What if someone goes not to fight, but to understand? You're talking about walking into a death trap, Kara said. I'm talking about being exactly what I am. An Omega who thinks before attacking, who looks for solutions other than violence. That's what got me through the combat trial. That's what might get me through this. The prophecy, Elder Thorn said quietly. The seer said you'd have to choose between saving the king or saving the kingdom. This is that choice, isn't it? You go north alone, you might save the territories, but you'll almost certainly die trying. Elara looked at Rowan, saw the answer in his eyes before he spoke. I forbid it, he said. We'll find another way. There is no other way. Every hour we wait, they take more wolves, build more power. Eventually, they'll be strong enough to march south, and then we'll be fighting them on multiple fronts with dwindled numbers. Elara's hands clenched on the table edge. I didn't survive 3 days of hell to become queen just so I could hide while my people die. Our people, Rowan corrected. And I won't let you sacrifice yourself on a theory. It's not a theory, it's strategy. The Frostwalkers want powerful prey. I'm the opposite of that. I'm small, untrained compared to real warriors, and my strength isn't physical. It's exactly the kind of target they'll ignore until I'm already past their defenses. Or they'll kill you the moment you cross the divide, Rowan said harshly. This isn't courage, Elara. This is suicide with extra steps. She crossed to him, acutely aware of every eye in the room tracking the movement. When she spoke, it was quiet enough that only he could hear. You asked me to be your queen, to stand beside you and help lead this kingdom. That means making the hard calls. You taught me that. Her hand found his. This is my hard call. Let me make it. His fingers tightened around hers. The bond. If you die, it won't just break. It'll shatter. Part of me will die with you. Then you'd better make sure I have everything I need to survive. For a long moment, Rowan just stared at her. The war room held its collective breath. Finally, he turned back to the table. Elder Thorn, tell me everything you know about the heart of winter. Every detail, no matter how small. Relief and terror warred in Elara's chest. He was letting her go. She'd won the argument and suddenly wished she hadn't. The planning took 6 hours. Thorn pulled every ancient text he could find, spreading them across library tables while Elara, Rowan, Kara, and a handful of trusted advisors pored over fragmentary accounts of the Frostwalkers' last appearance. The information was maddeningly incomplete. Most of the wolves who'd faced them 400 years ago had died. and the survivors' accounts were vague, trauma-clouded. But patterns emerged. The Frostwalkers avoided fire. Not feared it exactly, but were repelled by its presence. They hunted at night and in storms, their power waxing with darkness and cold. And they had a weakness for questions. Any wolf who could speak to them without threatening had a chance of passing unchallenged. "That's barely a strategy," Kara said, frustration sharp in her voice. "Talk nicely and hope they don't kill you?" "It's more than we had an hour ago," Elara replied, copying notes onto a smaller parchment she could carry. "The key is understanding their nature. They're not mindless monsters. They're purposeful. They want something." "Blood and death," Marcus muttered from where he'd been relegated to the corner. He'd protested the mission vehemently, but had been overruled by Rowan's direct order. "No, that's what they take, not what they want." Elara tapped the oldest text. This account from the final battle mentions a Frostwalker who spoke to the pack leader before attacking. It said, "You stole our purpose and now we starve." What if they're not invading? What if they're trying to reclaim something we took? Rowan leaned over her shoulder to read the passage. "The account doesn't say what purpose." "Then that's what I need to find out. If I can understand what they lost, maybe I can negotiate a solution that doesn't require mutual slaughter." "You're assuming they're capable of negotiation," Thorne said carefully. "The text described them as implacable. Once the claiming circles are set, they don't stop until they're fed or destroyed. Everything's capable of negotiation if you find the right leverage." Elara met the elder's eyes. "You said they're winter-given hunger. What does winter hunger for?" Thorne was quiet for a long moment. "An end. Every winter hungers for spring, for the release of its grip. Perhaps the Frostwalkers seek the same. Then I find out what's keeping them in eternal winter and offer them a path to spring." "That's the most naive thing I've heard in 3 decades, Marcus said. "They're monsters. You negotiate with them, you die. Simple as that." Elara turned to face him fully. "You know what, Marcus? You're probably right. This is probably naive and stupid, and I'll probably die trying. But at least I'll die doing something, instead of sitting in a fortress arguing while wolves vanish into the dark. At least I'll have tried." Something flickered in Marcus's expression. Not agreement exactly, but a grudging acknowledgement of her point. Rowan cleared his throat. "Kara, assemble a support team. They'll accompany Elara to the edge of the frozen divide and establish a fallback position. If this goes wrong, I want extraction ready." "And if extraction isn't possible?" Kara asked quietly. "Then you burn the entire wasteland to bedrock to make sure nothing follows her south." The finality in his voice made Elara shiver. They prepared through the night. Kara outfitted Elara with cold weather gear designed for mobility over warmth. She'd need to move fast if things went wrong. A pack with 3 days' worth of supplies, fire-starting materials, and a small blade that Elara sincerely hoped she wouldn't have to use. Healer Brennan appeared with a leather pouch full of herbs. "Feverfew for cold-induced headaches, willow bark if you're injured, and this—" He pressed a small vial into her hand. "Is nightshade extract. If you're captured and there's no escape, 1 drop will stop your heart in 30 seconds, painlessly." Elara stared at the vial. "That's dark. That's mercy. Better a quick death than what the Frostwalkers might do if they decide you're useful alive." She pocketed the vial with hands that shook only slightly. The hardest part was saying goodbye to Rowan. They met in his private chambers an hour before dawn. Elara found him standing at the window, staring north toward the darkness she'd soon be entering. He didn't turn when she entered, but she felt the bond thrum with his awareness of her presence. "I could stop you," he said quietly. "Lock you in these rooms under guard. Keep you safe by force." "You could," Elara agreed. "But you won't." "Why not?" "Because you meant it when you said I was your equal. And equals don't cage each other, even out of love." Rowan finally turned. In the candlelight, his face was all hard angles and shadows. "The bond will stretch as you travel north. It'll hurt. And if you die," his voice cracked, "if you die, I'll feel every second of it." Elara crossed to him. "Then feel me being brave. Feel me fighting. And when I come back, feel me choosing you all over again. He pulled her into his arms with barely controlled desperation. Promise me you'll run if it's hopeless. Promise me you won't die trying to be a hero. I promise I'll survive however I have to, even if it means running. They held each other in the pre-dawn darkness, two souls bound by magic and choice, both terrified of the separation to come. I love you, Rowan said against her hair. I don't know if I've said that clearly enough, but I do, completely. Elara's throat tightened. I know. I feel it every time you look at me, like I'm not weak, like I'm exactly enough. You're more than enough. You're everything. When they finally separated, Elara's eyes burned with unshed tears, but she didn't let them fall, couldn't afford to. She had a kingdom to save. The journey north took 2 days of brutal travel through progressively hostile terrain. Kara led the support team, 12 of her best fighters, all volunteers, all grim-faced at the prospect of watching their potential queen walk into a frozen hell. They spoke little, conserved energy, watched the tree line with weapons ready. The land changed as they traveled. Green gave way to gray, then white. The temperature dropped until every breath hurt. Wildlife vanished, first the deer and rabbits, then the birds, until finally even the insects went silent. On the second evening, they reached the frozen divide. It wasn't a physical barrier, no wall, no chasm, just a line where life stopped. Where the air turned so cold it seemed to crystallize, where the ground became permafrost that crunched underfoot like broken glass. Beyond the divide, the world was white and empty and waiting. This is as far as we go, Kara said, dismounting. We'll establish camp here, maintain a beacon fire. If you need to retreat, head for the light. Elara nodded, not trusting her voice. They made camp in tense silence, posted sentries, built a fire large enough to be seen for miles, and then there was nothing left to do but wait for dawn. Elara sat by the fire, checking her pack for the 7th time. Everything was there. Everything was ready, except her. You know, Kara said, settling beside her, when I first saw you, I thought you'd last maybe 2 days in the fortress before running back to your cabin. Sometimes I wish I had. No, you don't. You're terrified, but you're not a coward. Cowards don't walk into death for people they barely know. I know you. I know Brennan. I know the Omega healers who thanked me after the summit because I proved they weren't invisible. Elara stared into the flames. Maybe that's enough. It's more than most royalty can claim. Kara handed her a flask. Drink. It'll help you sleep. Elara took a sip and immediately regretted it. Whatever was in that flask tasted like liquid fire and stripped the lining from her throat. What is that? Something that'll knock you out for 6 hours and make sure you wake up rested. Drink it all. You'll need your strength tomorrow. Elara obeyed, wincing with each swallow. Within minutes, exhaustion rolled over her like a wave. She barely made it to her bedroll before unconsciousness claimed her. She dreamed of silver eyes and frozen wastelands and a voice that whispered, "Save the one you love, or save the kingdom he rules." Dawn came in shades of gray. Elara woke to find Kara already breaking camp, the support team moving with efficient silence. No one spoke. What was there to say? She ate a cold breakfast, secured her pack, checked her blade one final time. Then she stood at this edge of the divide and looked north. White. Endless white, broken only by skeletal ice formations that looked almost like trees. Almost like buildings. Almost like a civilization frozen mid-breath. The bond will guide you back, Rowan's voice echoed in her mind. They'd discovered last night that the bond allowed limited mental communication when both parties focused. I'll be here, waiting. I know, she whispered back. And then Elara Frostvale, rejected Omega turned queen in waiting, stepped across the frozen divide into a realm where winter ruled eternal. The cold hit like a physical blow. Even through her layers, it found skin, sank teeth into bone. Elara forced herself to keep walking, to put distance between herself and the safety of Kara's camp. The landscape was eerily beautiful. Ice crystals caught the weak sunlight and threw rainbows across the snow. The silence was absolute. No wind, no animal sounds, just the crunch of her boots and her own labored breathing. She walked for 3 hours before she found the first marker circle. It was exactly as Lyra had described. Stones carved with symbols that hurt to look at, arranged in a perfect ring maybe 30 feet across. And in the center, bones. Wolf bones, arranged in spiral patterns, bleached white by cold and time. Elara circled it carefully, staying well outside the perimeter. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to get as far from this wrongness as possible. But she needed to understand. She knelt at the circle's edge and studied the symbols. They weren't random. They told a story. She could feel it, even if she couldn't read the language. A story of hunger, loss, endless waiting. "You're trying to come home," Elara whispered. "Aren't you?" The air shimmered. For just a moment, Elara saw them. Figures made of ice and shadow, standing in the spaces between seconds. Not attacking, just watching, judging. Then they were gone. But Elara had seen enough. Seen the hunger in their not-quite faces, the desperate, aching need that transcended mere violence. "I can help you," she said to the empty air. "But you have to let me reach the heart. You have to let me understand what was taken from you." Silence answered. Then impossibly, the wind picked up, not hostile guiding, pushing gently at her back, urging her deeper into the waste. Elara took a breath, let it out slowly, and followed where the dead winter led. She walked for 6 more hours, the wind guiding her through ice fields and around hidden crevasses that would have swallowed her without the gentle redirections. The sun tracked across the sky, weak and distant. As twilight approached, she saw it. The heart of winter. A massive structure of ice rising from the frozen plain like a cathedral built by mad gods. Spires twisted toward the sky, their surfaces carved with the same symbols from the marker circles. And at the structure's center, visible through translucent walls, something glowed with cold blue light. Elara approached on legs that trembled with exhaustion and fear. The entrance was a natural arch of ice. Beyond it, stairs descended into the structure's depths. Every rational part of her brain screamed that entering was suicide, but the Frostwalkers hadn't killed her yet, hadn't even touched her. They were letting her come. She descended. The interior was vast, a cavern of ice lit by that eerie blue glow emanating from the center. And there, suspended in a column of frozen light, was the source. A wolf. Not a Frostwalker. A real wolf, white as new snow, frozen in mid-leap. Its eyes were open, aware, trapped in an instant that had lasted 400 years. And Elara understood. "You're the guardian," she breathed. "The spirit of winter itself. The packs didn't just drive away the Frostwalkers. They trapped you here, cut you off from the natural cycle. And without you, winter can't end, can't transform into spring, so it just hungers. Forever." The blue light pulsed. Acknowledgement. "The Frostwalkers aren't invading. They're trying to free you. They've been trying for 4 centuries, but they're too weak without you to break the binding." Another pulse. Elara circled the column, studying the symbols carved into the ice. They were wards, powerful ones, designed to hold the winter spirit in eternal stasis. "If I free you, will the Frostwalkers stop?" she asked. The light pulsed twice. "Yes." "And winter will follow its natural cycle again, cold when needed but releasing into spring?" 2 pulses. Elara pulled her blade. The metal was already frosting over in the intense cold. "Then I'm sorry my ancestors did this to you. And I'm going to make it right." She drove the blade into the first ward symbol. Ice exploded. The cavern shook. Somewhere above, the Frostwalkers shrieked, not in rage, but in hope. Elara moved to the second ward, the third. Each strike sent shockwaves through the structure. Cracks spiderwebbed across the walls. She was on the 7th ward when the binding shattered completely. The column of light exploded outward, raw winter magic flooding the chamber. Elara was thrown backward, hitting the ice wall hard enough to knock the breath from her lungs. She scrambled up just as the frozen wolf landed before her. It was massive, ancient. Power radiated from it like heat from a forge. The winter spirit regarded her with eyes older than mountains. "Thank you, small one," it said in a voice like wind through caves. 400 years. 400 years of hunger and stasis because your ancestors feared what they couldn't control. "I'm sorry," Elara managed. "I'm so sorry they did this." "Sorry is wind. Action is substance." The spirit circled her. "You freed me when you had no obligation, when it would have been safer to let me rot. Why?
Because trapping you was wrong. Because the frost walkers were suffering. Because keeping winter frozen hurts everyone. Elara met the spirit's gaze. And because I know what it's like to be trapped by what others think you should be. The spirit laughed, a sound like ice breaking in spring thaw. The Omega Queen, I have heard the whispers even in my prison, the gentle one who showed mercy to enemies and conquered through compassion. I'm not a conqueror, I'm just trying to save my people. By freeing their ancient adversary? Interesting strategy. The spirit lowered its massive head until they were eye to eye. I will grant you a boon, Elara Frostvale. One gift for 400 years of imprisonment ended. I don't need a gift. I just need you to call off the Frostwalkers. Let winter return to its cycle. That's enough. That is freely given, not a boon. Choose something for yourself. Elara thought of Rowan, waiting in terror for news of her death, thought of the bond stretching thin between them. Can you make the journey back faster? Let me return to the divide before nightfall. The spirit's eyes gleamed. You could ask for power, for immortality, for the ability to command winter itself, and you ask for a shortcut home? I ask to not make the people I love suffer longer than necessary. Spoken like a true queen, the spirit touched its nose to her forehead. So be it, but know this, you have changed the balance today. Winter will remember, and when the time comes that you need us, we will answer. The world blurred. Elara gasped as reality folded around her, ice and distance compressing into a single frozen moment. When vision cleared, she was standing at the frozen divide, Kara's campfire blazing before her. The guard captain was on her feet instantly, sword drawn. Elara? How did you... You've been gone less than a day. It should have taken weeks to reach the heart. It's done, Elara said, her legs giving out. Kara caught her before she could fall. The winter spirit is free. The Frostwalkers will return north. We're safe. You freed their power source? Are you insane? Probably, but it was the right thing to do. Elara was shaking now, adrenaline crash hitting hard. Kara, I need you to send word to Rowan. Tell him I'm alive. Tell him I'm coming home. The bond flared to life in her chest, and she felt Rowan's response, relief so profound it brought tears to her eyes. I felt you, his voice echoed in her mind. Every second. I felt your fear, your determination, your compassion, even in the face of death. You magnificent, impossible woman, come home, please. I'm coming, she whispered back. The journey south was a blur of exhausted triumph. News of Elara's success traveled faster than they did, carried by scout messengers who spread the word that the Omega Queen had walked into the frozen wastes and returned with peace instead of war. By the time they reached the fortress 3 days later, the entire court had turned out to greet them. Elara rode through the gates on a borrowed horse, so tired she could barely stay upright. The crowd parted before her, and for the first time since she'd arrived at this place, the stares weren't hostile. They were awed. Rowan stood at the fortress entrance, and the moment Elara dismounted, he closed the distance between them and pulled her into his arms. Never again, he said against her hair. I felt you risking your life, felt you freeing that spirit, felt the building collapse around you. My heart stopped 12 times. But it started again. I came back. You did more than come back. You did the impossible. He pulled away enough to look at her. The Frostwalkers are retreating. Already the reports are coming in. The marker circles are dissolving. The missing wolves are being returned. You saved them. You saved us all. I just did what made sense. You negotiated peace with an enemy everyone else wanted to destroy. You chose mercy when violence was expected. You proved that strength isn't just about who can fight hardest. It's about who can think differently. Around them, the crowd murmured agreement. Elara saw Omega faces in that crowd. Healers, caregivers, support staff. Looking at her with something approaching hope, and she saw Marcus Ironridge standing at the edge of the gathering, his expression unreadable. Their eyes met across the courtyard. Marcus's jaw worked. Then, slowly, deliberately, he dropped to one knee. The gesture rippled through the crowd. One by one, the pack leaders followed. Even the ones who'd supported his challenge. Even the ones who'd called her weak. They knelt before the Omega who'd won through compassion instead of conquest. Rowan took her hand.
The Council of Elders has requested an audience. They want to formalize your position as queen. Make it official." Elara looked at the kneeling wolves, at the fortress that had seemed so hostile just days ago, at the man who'd chosen her despite every reason not to. "Then I guess we'd better not keep them waiting," she said, and as they walked together into the fortress, Elara Frostvale, rejected Omega, wilderness survivor, warrior of mercy, stepped fully into the role she'd been terrified to claim. The kingdom's first queen who'd conquered through kindness, and the winter spirit's words echoed in her mind. "When you need us, we will answer." Somehow she knew that promise would matter. But for now, walking hand in hand with her mate, feeling the warmth of recognition from wolves who'd once dismissed her, Elara allowed herself a moment of pure, uncomplicated victory. She'd proven them wrong, and that was just the beginning. The coronation was set for the winter solstice, 3 weeks after Elara's return from the frozen wastes. 3 weeks that transformed the northern territories in ways no one had anticipated. The first change came from the Frostwalkers themselves. True to the winter spirit's word, they'd retreated north, but not before returning every wolf they'd taken. 17 scouts stumbled back across the divide, disoriented but alive, speaking in hushed tones about ice caverns and voices that asked questions instead of delivering death. They'd been tested, they said, judged, and found worthy of release because the small queen showed us mercy, so we returned the favor. The second change came from the land itself. Winter, no longer trapped in eternal hunger, settled into a natural rhythm. The brutal cold that had been creeping south for weeks retreated. Snow still fell, but gently now, the kind that blanketed instead of buried. The third change came from the Omega population. 2 days after Elara's return, a young Omega healer named Senna arrived at the fortress gates asking to speak with the queen. Then another. Then 5 more. Within a week, dozens had made the journey, Omegas from every pack in the northern territories, all asking the same question. "How did you do it? How did you make them see us?" Elara met with them in the great hall, still uncomfortable with the title of queen, but unable to turn away wolves who looked at her like she'd lit a candle in lifelong darkness. "I didn't make anyone see anything," she told them, sitting among them instead of on the raised dais where Rowan had insisted her throne be placed. "I just stopped hiding what I was, stopped apologizing for choosing compassion over cruelty." "But you fought," a gray-haired Omega named Petra said. Her hands were scarred from decades of healing work. "You won a combat trial against a trained warrior. That's not just compassion." "No, that's survival paired with compassion. I fought because I had to, not because violence was my first choice. And when I had Garrett beaten, I chose mercy because killing him would have made me exactly what Marcus claimed I was, too soft to lead." Elara met each of their eyes in turn. "Our strength isn't in becoming what they expect. It's in proving that different kinds of strength exist and matter." "The pack leaders won't accept that," Senna said quietly. "Some of them still think Omegas are only good for support roles. Your coronation hasn't changed centuries of tradition. Then we change it ourselves, slowly, by being undeniable." Elara stood. "I'm establishing a council, an Omega council that advises the crown on matters of health, community welfare, and conflict resolution. You'll have direct access to me and through me to the king. Your voices will be heard in policy decisions." The silence that followed was profound. "That's unprecedented," Petra breathed. "So was an Omega queen. We're making new precedent." Elara smiled. "But I need your help. I need Omegas who are willing to step into visibility, to speak up even when it's uncomfortable, to prove that caring about others isn't weakness. It's the foundation of a functional society." One by one, hands rose. By the end of the meeting, Elara had 15 volunteers willing to serve on the council. It was a start. But not everyone welcomed the changes. Marcus Ironridge requested a private audience 4 days before the coronation. Rowan wanted to refuse, but Elara insisted on hearing him out. They met in a small chamber off the main hall, with Kara stationed outside the door and Rowan standing silent sentinel beside Elara's chair. Marcus looked older than he had at the summit, tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. "I came to apologize," he said without preamble. Elara blinked. Of all the things she had expected, contrition wasn't on the list. For what, specifically? Rowan asked, his tone glacial. Publicly humiliating her? Forcing her into a combat trial designed to kill her? Or invoking ancient laws to challenge a decision that was none of your concern? All of it, Marcus met Elara's eyes. I was wrong about you. About what strength looks like. About what this kingdom needs. Why the sudden change of heart? Elara asked carefully. Because I've spent the last week watching Omega healers treat the scouts who returned from the wastes. Watching them work with a competence and dedication I'd always dismissed as subservient behavior. And I realized something. He paused. I've been leading my pack for 6 years. In that time, I've won territorial disputes, increased our wealth, established us as a force to be reckoned with. But I've also created a culture where wolves are afraid to show weakness, where asking for help is seen as failure. 3 of my pack members took their own lives last year because they'd rather die than admit they were struggling. The confession hung heavy in the air. After you freed the winter spirit, Marcus continued, one of my wolves, a young alpha named Reed, came to me. Said he'd been considering ending it, but seeing you choose mercy over violence made him reconsider. Made him think that maybe there was room in the world for different kinds of strength. He's getting help now. From an Omega counselor, and he's going to be okay. Elara's throat tightened. Marcus, you saved his life without even knowing he existed. That's power I'll never have. Power I don't deserve. Marcus straightened. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve that either. But I wanted you to know that you were right about all of it, and I'll spend the rest of my time as pack leader trying to build what you've already created, a place where compassion isn't punished. He turned to leave. Marcus, Elara called. He paused. You're not irredeemable. You made mistakes, but you're learning from them. That takes courage too. Something in his expression cracked. Thank you, Your Majesty. After he left, Rowan let out a long breath. I didn't think I'd ever see Marcus Ironridge humble. People can change. Sometimes they just need to see another way as possible. Elara leaned back in her chair. Though I'll admit I never expected an apology. You're changing the entire power structure of the Northern Territories, Elara. People who built their identities on the old ways are having to reckon with the fact that those ways were insufficient. Some will adapt. Others, he shook his head. There will be resistance. The coronation will make you a symbol, and symbols attract both devotion and hatred. I know, but we don't have a choice. If we're going to build something better, it has to start somewhere. Rowan pulled her to her feet and into his arms. Have I mentioned that you're terrifying when you're determined? Once or twice. Elara rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. Are you ready for this? For a queen who's going to push boundaries and make half the court uncomfortable. I've been waiting my entire reign for exactly this kind of disruption. He pressed a kiss to her hair. Build your new world, Elara. I'll make sure the old one doesn't burn it down. The night before the coronation, Elara couldn't sleep. She stood on the balcony of her chambers, no longer guest rooms but the queen's suite, a series of spaces that still felt too large, too grand for someone who'd lived in a one-room cabin for 8 months. The fortress was quiet, the courtyard below empty except for sentries making their rounds. Tomorrow, she'd stand before the entire Northern Territories and accept a crown she'd never wanted. Tomorrow, she'd become something she'd spent her whole life being told she couldn't be. The weight of it pressed down like physical chains. Second thoughts? Kara's voice came from the doorway. Elara turned to find the guard captain leaning against the frame, looking exhausted but alert. Can't sleep? I'm on night rotation, making sure no one tries anything dramatic before the ceremony. Kara stepped onto the balcony. You didn't answer my question. Not second thoughts. More like terror that I'm going to fail spectacularly and prove everyone who doubted me right. That's just fear talking. You've already succeeded in ways most rulers never manage. You ended a war without bloodshed. You're rebuilding social structures that have been broken for generations. You've given hope to wolves who'd forgotten what that felt like. Kara's smile was wry. If you fail now, at least you'll fail spectacularly from a great height. Elara laughed despite herself. That's a terrible pep talk. I'm a fighter, not a motivational speaker. Kara sobered. But I mean it, Elara.
You've changed things. Changed me, if I'm being honest. I spent 15 years believing that strength was only about who could hit hardest. Then I watched you talk your way past creatures that terrified our best warriors. Watched you choose mercy when violence would have been easier. And I realized I'd been limiting myself, limiting what was possible. You were already strong, Kara. I was competent. There's a difference. You taught me to be strong in ways that matter beyond the battlefield. Kara glanced at the stars. Tomorrow, when you accept that crown, you won't just be becoming queen. You'll be proving to every Omega, every wolf who's been told they're insufficient, that there are as many paths to power as there are people willing to walk them. No pressure, then. Exactly. Kara grinned. Sleep well, Your Majesty. You've got a kingdom to inherit. Dawn broke cold and clear over the northern territories. Elara woke to find her chambers filled with attendants, Omegas from the newly formed council, come to help her prepare. They moved with quiet efficiency, braiding her hair with silver thread, fastening her into a gown of white and ice blue that shimmered like fresh snow. Petra attached the ceremonial cloak, white wolf fur lined with silk, heavy enough that Elara felt the weight settle across her shoulders like responsibility made tangible. You look like winter itself, Senna said softly. Beautiful and powerful. Elara studied herself in the mirror. The woman looking back was a stranger, regal, composed, every inch a queen. Nothing like the rejected Omega who'd fled into the wilderness 9 months ago. Everything like the wolf she'd had to become to survive. I'm ready, she said. The coronation took place in the Great Hall, transformed for the occasion into something halfway between throne room and sacred space. Every pack leader in the Northern Territories was present, along with representatives from dozens of smaller packs. The room hummed with hundreds of heartbeats, hundreds of watching eyes. Elara walked the center aisle alone, as tradition demanded. Each step echoed in the vast space. At the far end, Rowan waited beside the obsidian throne, wearing the crown of the Alpha King and an expression of such fierce pride it made her chest ache. The Council of Elders stood before the dais, Elder Thorn holding the Queen's crown on a velvet cushion. It was beautiful, wrought silver formed into a circlet of ice branch designs, set with pale blue stones that caught the light like frozen stars. Elara climbed the steps and knelt before the council. Elara Frostvale, Elder Thorn intoned, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. You have been called to stand as queen beside King Rowan Ashgrave. You have proven yourself through trial of knowledge, trial of leadership, and trial of combat. You have walked into death itself and returned with peace. Do you accept this responsibility? Will you serve the Northern Territories with wisdom, courage, and compassion? Elara's mind flashed to her cabin, to 8 months of solitude, to the moment she'd dragged a dying wolf through her door and changed the course of her entire life. I will, she said clearly. Thorn lifted the crown. Then by the authority of the Council of Elders, by the will of the pack leaders, and by the blessing of the land itself, I name you Queen of the Northern Territories. May your reign be just, your wisdom deep, and your compassion eternal. He placed the crown on her head. The weight was significant, but not crushing. Elara rose, turned to face the assembled wolves, and for a moment the hall was silent as death. Then Rowan stepped forward and took her hand. My queen, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. My mate, my equal in all things. The hall erupted. Not just applause, howls. The traditional wolf salute, a sound that shook the rafters and spoke of acceptance deeper than words. Elara saw Omegas in the crowd with tears streaming down their faces. Saw pack leaders who'd challenged her now bowing in respect. Saw the future opening like a flower in spring. But the ceremony wasn't over. Elder Moira stepped forward, her ancient face grave. There is one final tradition. The queen must make a proclamation, a statement of intent that will guide her reign. Elara Frostvale, what do you declare? This was the moment Elara had been preparing for, the moment to set the tone for everything that would follow. She took a breath and spoke. For 400 years, the Northern Territories have operated on a simple principle, strength through dominance. The powerful ruled and everyone else served. That structure created stability, but it also created suffering.
It told entire populations that their worth was measured solely in physical prowess, that compassion was weakness, that asking for help was failure. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Elara pressed on. I stand here today as proof that principle is incomplete. I am small. I am an Omega. I have no great physical strength, no generations of combat training, no inherited authority. By every traditional measure, I should be invisible, insignificant. Yet I wear this crown because I prove that different strengths exist and matter. She let her gaze sweep the room. So here is my proclamation. Effective immediately, the Northern Territories will establish new councils focused on healing, mediation, and community welfare. These councils will be led by Omegas and staffed by any wolf who prioritizes cooperation over conquest. They will have equal authority to military councils in matters of policy. Shocked whispers. A few protests quickly silenced. Second, we will create safe spaces in every pack where wolves can seek help without fear of judgment. Mental health support, conflict resolution, resources for those struggling with trauma or despair. Because a strong pack isn't one where everyone suffers in silence. It's one where everyone has the support to thrive. Elder Thorn was smiling. Rowan squeezed her hand. Third, we will remember what I learned in the frozen wastes, that enemies are often just people we've stopped trying to understand, that violence should be a last resort, not a first response, that true strength lies in choosing mercy when vengeance would be easier. Elara's voice strengthened. I will not be a queen who rules through fear or force. I will be a queen who leads through example, who listens before acting, who remembers that every wolf in these territories, Alpha, Beta, Omega, deserves to be seen, heard, and valued. Not for what they can destroy, but for what they can build. She paused. The Northern Territories have survived for generations through strength alone. Under my reign, we will learn to thrive through strength paired with compassion, and we will prove to every wolf who's watching that there are as many ways to lead as there are stars in the winter sky. The silence that followed was profound. Then Marcus Ironridge stood. I support the Queen's proclamation. One by one, other pack leaders rose. Some looked uncertain, some looked relieved. All of them stood. Elder Thorn raised his staff. Let it be recorded. The Queen has spoken, and the packs have accepted. So begins the new era of the Northern Territories. The howls that followed shook the foundation stones. The celebration lasted 3 days. Wolves from across the territories flooded into the fortress, turning the courtyard into a festival ground. There was food, music, competitions of strength and skill. But there were also poetry readings, healing demonstrations, collaborative art projects, a blending of Omega traditions with Alpha customs that felt revolutionary. Elara moved through it in a daze of exhaustion and joy, accepting congratulations, settling minor disputes, learning the 100 small ways a queen was expected to interact with her people. On the third night, she finally escaped to the battlements for a moment of quiet. The winter sky was clear, stars sharp as ice chips against the darkness. Below, the fortress glowed with celebration. Music drifted up, laughter and howls, and the sound of a kingdom learning to be something new. There you are. Rowan appeared from the stairwell, carrying 2 cups of mulled wine. I've been looking for you for an hour. Sorry, I needed air. He handed her a cup and leaned against the parapet beside her. Regretting anything? No, just processing. A year ago, I was rejected and ran away to live alone in the wilderness. Now I'm a queen with councils to manage and policies to implement and hundreds of wolves looking to me for guidance. It's surreal. You're handling it better than I did when I first took the crown. I mostly just glowered at people until they submitted. Elara laughed. That tracks. They stood in comfortable silence, sipping wine and watching their kingdom celebrate below. The Omega councils are already making waves, Rowan said eventually. Petra submitted a proposal this morning for mandatory mental health training for all pack leaders. Marcus actually endorsed it. He's changing, slowly. Because you showed him another way was possible. Rowan turned to face her fully. You know what the most remarkable thing about you is? My ability to trip over my own feet while wearing a crown? Your absolute refusal to let anyone, including yourself, define your limitations. You were told Omegas can't lead, so you became a queen, told you can't fight. So you won a combat trial. Told you can't negotiate with monsters, so you made peace with the Frostwalkers. His hand cupped her cheek. You don't just break rules, Elara. You rewrite them. I just do what makes sense. No, you do what's right, regardless of whether it makes sense to anyone else. That's why wolves follow you. That's why I love you. Rowan's thumb brushed her cheekbone. And that's why our reign is going to change everything. Elara set down her wine and wrapped her arms around him. Our reign, I like the sound of that. Good, because you're stuck with me now, bonded, crowned, and thoroughly committed to building your compassionate revolution. There are worse fates. Name one. Being married to someone who doesn't support my compassionate revolution? Rowan laughed, the sound rich and genuine. Fair point. They kissed there on the battlements, the Alpha King and his Omega Queen, while their kingdom celebrated below and winter settled gentle across the land. 6 months later, Elara stood at the same battlements, watching the first genuine spring the Northern Territories had seen in 400 years. The snow was melting. Not the brutal, flood-inducing thaw that happened when winter held too long, but a gentle release. Green was emerging, grass in the courtyards, buds on the trees, the promise of renewal after long cold. The Omega Councils had become permanent fixtures of governance. Every pack now had mental health resources. Conflict resolution training was mandatory for all wolves in leadership positions. Slowly, painfully, the culture was shifting. Not everywhere. Not completely. There were still packs that resisted, alphas who clung to the old ways, wolves who saw Elara's reign as an aberration to be endured rather than embraced. But the tide was turning. Elara received letters daily from Omegas across the territories, stories of finding their voices, of standing up to pack leaders who'd dismissed them, of being heard, finally, after lifetimes of silence. Each letter was a small victory. Footsteps on the stairs announced a visitor. Elara turned to find healer Brennan ascending slowly, his basket in hand as always. Your Majesty, he said warmly, or should I still call you child? I can't quite break the habit. Child is fine. It reminds me where I came from. Elara gestured to the view. What brings you up here? News. And a gift. Brennan set down his basket and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. The first came from the northern border. The Frostwalkers sent an emissary. Elara's heart skipped. Are they peaceful? Completely. The emissary delivered a message from the winter spirit. It says that spring has returned to the frozen wastes for the first time since the binding. The Frostwalkers are content, no longer hunting, no longer starving. The emissary wanted you to know they remember your mercy and consider the Northern Territories under their protection. Relief flooded through her. The gamble had paid off. The choice to free rather than destroy had created an ally instead of an eternal enemy. And the gift? Brennan handed her the bundle. Elara unwrapped it to find a pendant, ice crystal carved into the shape of a wolf, strung on a silver chain. It was impossibly delicate, impossibly beautiful, and it radiated a cold that didn't burn. The emissary said it's a mark of the winter spirit's favor. Wear it, and you'll never suffer from cold. You'll be able to walk the frozen wastes as easily as summer meadows. Brennan's eyes twinkled. Apparently, the spirit is quite fond of you. Elara clasped the pendant around her neck. The ice crystal settled against her chest, cool and comforting. Thank you for bringing this. There's more. Your Omega Councils have started spreading beyond the Northern Territories. I've received inquiries from packs in the Western Mountains and the Southern Forests. They want to know how to implement similar systems. Your revolution is going continental, child. The magnitude of that hit her like a wave. I never meant to start a revolution. I just wanted to survive. The best revolutions are the ones that happen because someone refused to accept that survival required cruelty. Brennan gathered his basket. You've given permission to an entire generation of wolves to be something other than what tradition demanded. That's more powerful than any army. After he left, Elara stood alone with the spring breeze and the weight of change settling across her shoulders. She thought of her cabin in the wilderness, wondered if it still stood, or if the forest had reclaimed it. Part of her would always love that solitude, that simplicity, the quiet mornings and silent nights. But she'd never go back. Because she'd learned something crucial in the months since dragging a dying wolf through her door. Solitude was safe, but connection was survival. Isolation protected you from rejection, but it also cut you off from the possibility of becoming more than you'd ever imagined. She'd been rejected once, called weak, dismissed as insufficient. And now she was a queen who'd rewritten the rules of power itself. The door to the battlements opened again. This time it was Rowan, and from the look on his face, he had news. "The Western Territories just sent formal request," he said without preamble. "They want you to attend their spring summit. Speak about the Omega Council system. Apparently 3 of their major packs are on the verge of civil war over the old hierarchies, and they think your approach might offer a solution." That's a lot. That's influence. That's proof that what we're building here matters beyond our borders. Rowan crossed to her. "The question is, are you ready to take this beyond the Northern Territories? To become a symbol for change across the entire continent?" Elara looked out at the greening land, thought of all the Omegas who'd written to her, all the wolves struggling under systems that valued only one kind of strength, thought of the girl she'd been a year ago, hiding in the wilderness because the world had convinced her she was too soft to matter. "I'm ready," she said. "Then we'll leave in a week, together." Rowan took her hand, his fingers warm and solid. "You know this won't be easy. There will be packs that resist, alphas who see you as a threat, wolves who'd rather die than change." "I know, but we don't have a choice. The old way is breaking. We can either help build something new or watch everything collapse under its own cruelty." "Spoken like a true queen," Rowan pulled her close. "Have I told you lately that you're magnificent?" "Not in the last hour." "Unacceptable. Let me rectify that immediately." He proceeded to tell her in detail, and Elara let herself have this moment of peace before the next battle, because there would always be a next battle. Always wolves who needed convincing that compassion was strength, that mercy was power, that different didn't mean lesser. But she'd proven the impossible once already. She could do it again, and again, for as long as it took. The sun set over the Northern Territories in shades of gold and rose, painting the fortress in warm light. In the courtyard below, wolves gathered for the evening meal, alphas and omegas sitting together, sharing stories, building the kind of community Elara had dreamed of but never quite believed possible. She watched them and felt something settle in her chest. Not satisfaction, exactly. More like purpose. This was why she'd survived. Why the bond had formed. Why every painful step of the journey had been necessary. Not to prove Marcus wrong, though she had. Not to win a crown, though she wore one. But to show every wolf who'd ever been told they were insufficient that there were as many ways to be strong as there were ways to be kind. And that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was save a dying stranger in a blizzard and trust that mercy would matter. It had mattered. It would continue to matter. And Elara Frostvale, Omega Queen of the Northern Territories, winter spirits favored, breaker of ancient bindings and builder of new worlds, would spend the rest of her reign making sure every wolf knew it. The Omega they'd laughed at had become the queen they needed, and she was just getting started. 3 years later, in a small village on the western border, a young Omega named River pulled a wounded stranger from a storm. The stranger would turn out to be a rebel leader. The Omega would turn out to be braver than anyone expected. And when River stood before a hostile council and declared that compassion was a choice, not a weakness, they would invoke the name of Queen Elara, the Omega who'd proved that kindness could conquer where violence failed. The revolution continued, one mercy at a time.